What you're listening to right now is just an intro with me. If you would like to skip that intro, feel free, man. Value your time. Go ahead and look down in the description. There should be a time that the actual conversation with Megan starts. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Junkyard Love Podcast. It's me, your host, Mojo Jojo from the Powerpuff Girls. That's right. It's the monkey with the hat. I'm coming to you live right now from the back of an asteroid, from a comet, from a giant space rock orbiting planet Earth. I just so happen to have, enough podcast reception to record this intro for you. Set down a little base layer, a little foundation of what we're about to explore on this episode with Megan Hawkins from Better U Psychedelic Therapy. Better U is the company that I went through to do at-home ketamine therapy. You essentially have a consultation, a conversation with somebody, video chat, get your stuff all figured out, ask them whatever questions that you have, you go through questionnaires, whatever, and then they send the kit to your house. I think it goes through a pharmacy. Either way, you have to sign for it when it gets to your house. But inside the kit, there's a blindfold, there's a blood pressure cuff, there is a journal, there is the ketamine. It's in a troche. Troche. I feel like it's pronounced different. Everybody that I talk to, I never know which way to say. But this thing that dissolves on the inside of your lip or under your tongue, and that is the medicine itself. But anyway, you are also accompanied with it is a portal that you have online. You basically have a profile. I'm not sure if they have an app. Maybe it's an app now as well. But it walks you through everything. There's chapters, there's different sessions. So if you're doing your first one, you click on that. It gives you journal prompts to write. It gives you all the reminders. This whole thing, you're set up for success from the beginning, to do your at-home ketamine session. They give you all the 411 of what to do, how to set up your day itself, how to treat the days in between, how often to do it. Usually it's two trips a week. And I say trips, it's a psychedelic trip. But technically, ketamine is not a psychedelic, actually. There's a lot of interesting articles on that I've been reading. It's a little bit brainier than I can fully wrap my head around, but some of the examples are nice. But you do have what I would say a psychedelic trip. I had read that it wasn't a psychedelic and it was a dissociative. And to be honest, I found it to be much more like I've done mushrooms, magic mushrooms, psilocybin in the past, and I really found it to be quite similar to magic mushrooms. I had a friend use the term cosmic when it came to ketamine, and so there's something right about that. Ketamine does seem to be a bit more cosmic than the trip on psilocybin, magic mushrooms, but nonetheless, you are set up through this company. They give you everything that you need. They give you the support along the way. They give you the process. You know what to do the day of. You know what to do during. You know what to do after. It's great stuff. Some of the journal prompts are just fantastic. I found myself writing a ton for all of these. And there's just a lot to be said about this stuff. There's a lot to be said about the changes in personality, identity, mood, self, the holding on that we all have with our various, ailments, and there's I don't know. I want to allow Megan the space to explain these things so much more elegantly and, eloquently even than I possibly can, which she does in this episode. But I think as a base layer, it's certainly very interesting. There's something about this. There's something very good about this. There's even, this has only been a couple months for me since I've done it, and there's still things I feel like unfolding, there is, as Megan says, psychedelics will often give you what you need, not exactly what you want. And there is some sort of truth to that. There's like some acceptance of things in life that seems to come afterwards. But regardless, I would suggest, I had kind of gotten a little sloppy, admittedly, on my last 3 trips. I was doing a lot of traveling for work, and I had a lot of eagerness about doing doing this whole process. So I kind of like split up my last half of the sessions in a way that probably wasn't as good as I should have. Like I waited too far in between, and I was traveling, so I would like skip a week in between or whatever. I think there are some powerful attributes to be said towards the 8 consecutive sessions if you have that availability. It's 2 sessions a week. Yeah, man. If you guys want, they actually sent me. I'm so happy they sent. This is the cool thing about having a podcast. They sent me some swag, like so. I got some Better U shirts and hat and tote, and just super cool. So sweet of them. And they also sent me some $100 off gift cards. So if you, I don't know, if you're a fan of the podcast, hit me up, email me, message me, text me if you have my phone number. And if you're planning on doing this, might as well get $100 off. I did want to also mention the word disassociative. That's a huge word that you hear in the world of ketamine. That was a mad turnoff for me. I actually really was kind of about that word. If you've dealt with any sort of, any variation of these things that you're coming here with, depression, anxiety, PTSD, whatever, you've probably actually experienced the scarier, crappy version of disassociation. Depersonalization, derealization, DPDR is also known on some subreddits. I used to have some issues with this, and I would say that I really don't find that to be a great word to use interchangeably for this ketamine trip, this ketamine experience that you have. I just, maybe it's similar, but if I had it my way, I would use entirely different words. It just seems like the experience that I had under the ketamine is quite different than that I would consider to be disassociation that I've dealt with in the past. So I just want to throw that out there just because that was something I totally forgot to ask Megan about, but it was something that was really kind of like loud to me at the beginning that would have actually kind of been helpful if somebody said like, maybe it's not exactly what you think it is. Perhaps I'm going to be wrong, and maybe everybody's definition of disassociation is going to be vastly different. It's such a strange experience anyway, but if there's things that we didn't cover in this podcast, if there's things that I didn't cover in the intro, if you have questions, man, just reach out. I say that in the podcast, but just reach out to Better You if you're interested in this. I feel like they're more than willing to explain and get you along for the ride, or make you feel better about anything that you're nervous or confused about. I will leave you with this one thing. I just want to say, follow all of their prompts, follow their portal, do what they say to do, go through the process the way that they lay it out, and do all of it. And like, just be serious about getting this stuff on your calendar, setting the time aside. Like, don't be lackluster. And then once you do all that, then just stinking aloud. Like, once you have that blindfold on, once that music thing is going, once you're in the world of that playlist for the next 90 minutes to 2 hours, just do whatever is, just allow whatever is happening. I mean, I would do some strange things that like were really healing and powerful to me. I was like drumming on my chest. I'm, kind of like writhing comfortably and gently, in my bed. I'm singing and humming kind of, there was a bunch of like strange vocal tonality frequency sort of things that seemed to be happening that just felt really good to allow them to happen. I think if there was somebody sitting next to me, if I was nervous about like who could hear me or if someone's seeing me, I might be less prone to do those things. And I'm just really aware of that. Like, we have this self-conscious nature of can I allow this thing that feels so natural to work through me without my constricting hands. And I think just for this, I would like to say, allow it, do whatever weird stuff. Maybe you don't move your body at all, and that's your experience. That's super cool. Maybe you don't sing or hum or nothing at all. That's super cool too. But if you do have the inclination to do those sorts of things, keep it safe. Listen to the instructions. You're on something that is lessening in many ways your motor function. So be smart, but I don't know, just allow yourself to experience this thing and really be willing to kind of accept what's on the other side. I think it has potential to be a beautiful experience. Anyway, please read the description below. Any info you need to know, you should be able to go down below and click on links. Hit me up for the $100 off. And then as usual, please, if wherever you're at, leave a review, like, subscribe, comment if any of that. Share with anybody who needs it, and feel free to ask me anything that you need to know that I can help with. And I leave you in the very capable hands of Megan Hawkins. You guys are going to love this episode. You're going to love the way that she lays everything out: analogies, metaphors, personal experiences, some stuff that she's learned from working with patients. She shares a lot of her personal background too. After we get into it for a while, she actually kind of tells the story of how she landed where she is today. It's this like unbelievable story too. So yeah, stick around for that. I know it's a long one, but if there's a lot of important stuff from the beginning and middle and to end, honestly. So maybe this is one that you don't sit down and listen to for the entirety of it, but you just listen to it in 20 to 30 minute chunks throughout the next couple of days. Regardless, get it in there. There's lots of good stuff. There's a lot of people who could benefit from this information. You're going to love Megan. Here we go, guys. Thanks for listening to the Junkyard Love podcast. We'll catch you next time.
At what age do we learn to have better conversations with ourselves?
Knowledge is power. We'll assume going into the podcast that I've basically given you like a partial introduction, but I think I'll probably spend 5-10 minutes as my little intro, basically saying, hey, I did ketamine therapy, here's what it was, here's the company, I got this person on from this, like kind of give them a little bit of a basis, because I definitely want to bring in complete newcomers, like people who don't know anything about psychedelics, people who don't know anything about ketamine, any of that. As much as I like definitely want to go into the weeds if that's where we go, I just want to give people, I always like to bring in the newbie. Like I want to leave everybody in, even if they've never heard the podcast or heard about any of us in any way, they feel like they're part of the conversation. So we will assume that I have done that sort of intro. And then, yeah, I mean, otherwise we can get rolling. Do you have any questions prior? Do you have anything on your mind?
Not really. No. I mean, I was gonna like talk about like I'm like allowed to say like you can go to betterucare like .com, like the Instagram, like things like that. That way it's sort of like, hey, like if you're interested, like you can check us out, blah blah blah, things like that. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Plug away. Don't be afraid to say anything. And like, yeah, I'm totally fine. And like I said again yesterday, if you like accidentally say something or there's something you forgot, I can throw it in the description. I can add it to social media. If you say something you wish you didn't say, just let me know. I can clip it out. Like I control everything on this, luckily, so I get to kind of present it how I'd like. And I definitely, like I said, I'm like such a fan of you guys and everything you're doing. So like, please plug away on Better.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. I'm excited. I'm ready to jump right on in.
Cool. All right. Well, everyone, listeners, welcome to the Junkyard Love podcast. I am happy you're here today. I'm here with Megan. I'm here with Megan Hawkins. Yeah, I want to get into your story, Megan. You gave me a glimpse of your story last night, and I was just mind blown. I was just like, you introduced it as you're not going to believe this, and I'm like, okay, cool. And then it was truly an unbelievable story. And then just your journey after that. I really just want to let you kind of take it away in a lot of ways, because I feel like you describe your journey so well, and it leads right into everything about ketamine and ketamine therapy, and kind of like how you guys started this whole thing, and then we'll just get going into ketamine therapy in general, and all the benefits for depression and PTSD and anxiety, and I'm just like so excited about all this stuff. So I would love to just start with, Megan, who are you, and how'd you get into all this stuff?
Yeah, so my name's Megan, and I am with Better U Psychedelic Therapy. We do ketamine currently primarily via telemedicine, but hopefully we're going to be opening up, or not hopefully, we are actually going to be opening up a Los Angeles headquarters location here very soon. So that's going to be super exciting. But what we do primarily is we work with patients with ketamine, and we send it to them at home. So you receive a brain box that's got medication, a couple of like other helpful things in there. For example, a blood pressure cuff, an eye mask, some little heart fun glasses, a journal, a couple other things. And basically, from the very moment that you first come to our website, all the way to the point of where you've been just kind of getting into, maintenance care, you are having a resource, you have information, you have content every single step of the way. So much so to the point where when you come to our website, before even needing to sign up, you can actually just get on a call and talk to somebody, and they'll give you, some information, walk you through the program, kind of how it works, and go through pricing, things like that. So we really have an incredible team that assists you really throughout that whole process. So if you ever have questions, things, you can always reach out to us, and we have a really wonderful team to help.
Yeah,
But
I felt really supported, like right away. Everybody that I talked to, it was really cool. Everybody was super willing to answer questions, and yeah, I mean, it felt like, I think going into it, I was like, okay, you're doing it out at home. It's not like alienating thing, but it didn't feel like that. It definitely, I'm just in agreement from someone who has done this. It's definitely, you feel supported and have all the resources.
good, good, good. Yeah, it's that's the biggest thing. And that when we were first coming to this and figuring out, like, okay, back in 2019, ketamine, the Johnson and Johnson, they came up with their own version. They patented it. It's about half the molecule that makes up the total molecule of ketamine, and it's a nasal spray. It is covered by insurance, but it has to be done in clinic. And that is kind of what started this whole ketamine revolution, in a sense, with the at-home models, and specifically for depression, anxiety, as well as PTSD. And so that's really when, back in that day, it was about $1,500 for a single IV session, and there was no preparation, there was no post integration. It was basically just, you come into a room, you have a couple minutes of, have you ever tried ketamine, and have you ever tried psychedelics, like what's your baseline going into it, and then basically just plug you in and send you off. And while for some people that could be incredibly transformative and helpful, if you have never had any experience with ketamine or psychedelics, and you have no idea what to expect, the thing with psychedelics is that they can be equally as harmful as they can be beneficial. So it's incredibly important to really not only prepare people before you go into that kind of experience of what they're getting into, but also the way we do it is we make sure that we start people off very slow. So you're essentially dipping your toe in the water before, essentially cannonballing off into that deep end. So you can really get comfortable, let that guard down, because that makes a huge difference in the treatment as well. And so basically, like I said, this was back 2019. It was about $1,500 a session. And, it's, while that is, it can be very beneficial, it's just not feasible, and it's not sustainable. And most of us, like, can't even imagine spending more than a couple $100 on mental health, let alone $1,500 for a single session. And so when creating Better You, our biggest goals were to really focus on making this as accessible as possible, but also as affordable as we can, so that not just that 1% of people can be able to utilize this treatment. So that's really kind of our goals with Better You, and specifically kind of what I do. I've been here since day one. One of the founders have been building this every day, piece by piece, for almost about a little over 2 years now, I would say. And of course, it was definitely much different in the beginning, but we've been growing, adding new content, expanding, of course, into more and more states, being very thoughtful about not expanding too quickly, wanting to ensure that quality of care. That really is like probably our number one priority, is making sure that each and every single person gets that level of care and attention that we all deserve, because one size does not fit all, nor should it, right? We're all individual, unique creatures, and we should be treated as such. So that's really the way that we have structured our program, so that not only when you first go through it initially, it's a bit more structured, but then after that, you can really kind of play with it and customize it to fit your needs, which is really great. In terms of what I do with Better You, that has kind of shifted a little bit, like I said, since the beginning. Of course, I was doing, wearing all these different hats in the beginning. And then as we've grown and built out the different teams of departments and just different aspects of the company, now what I really primarily work with is with patients each day. And I help troubleshoot. I basically help run the support and retention team. So anytime somebody has an issue, they have a question, they're doing their sessions and something is not, they need help, they have questions, they're like, am I doing this right? I don't know what to expect. It's sort of like you can get on a call with me and I'll kind of help, just ask some baseline questions to kind of get an idea of what's going on. And based on that, I can give you really helpful tools, advice, things to try, making those little adjustments to kind of find that perfect dose. But additionally, if you're wanting to continue after the initial first round, kind of moving into more of that maintenance, that's also really where I can kind of help you to understand how the process works, what maintenance looks like, in terms of timeline, frequency, how often you're doing the sessions, and just really giving helpful tools and for people to get the most out of this and really maximize their sessions. So that's sort of what I really focus on now with patients. But among a few other things, that's kind of primarily what I do now. So
Right,
yeah.
right. Yeah, that's how I initially had met you because I had done my first initial sessions, and then you guys have it to where you have a conversation with one of you over there, and yeah, I mean, I feel like I felt really at ease after our conversation. There was a lot of things that like I was kind of curious about, and you explained it really well. I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, and I really appreciated your perspective on a lot of those things. Just to like throw in my hat, just to say you do feel supported through this stuff. I think like it may be a little daunting for people to do this, at home. Seems kind of weird in some senses, but I mean, I actually like I wouldn't have it any other way. I really liked the way that it went, and I felt very supported. Um, Okay, so we'll continue on to with more of your story, but what is the difference between our different, so you were saying maintenance versus our initial dose.
Mhm.
So is it 4 sessions or eight session is typically the dose that people would be recommended?
So the way that it works, we worked, very closely with the clinicians in developing our protocols essentially. And so the way that we've kind of figured it all out is that if somebody has, like, if you've been dealing with something a bit more chronically, let's just say about a year or more, that's really where clinicians will recommend to get started with the 8 session package. And what that means is essentially it breaks down to doing about 2 sessions per week. Um, that's really kind of the first, the main package that a lot of people do get started with. The other is the 4 session package, which breaks down to doing about 1 session per week. That's typically if, whatever it is that you're coming to this treatment for, it's a bit more recent, like something, within the past 12 months or so. So that's kind of the way the clinicians will recommend if you're interested in getting started, kind of in terms of being able to choose whether you want to do that 4 session package or 8 session package initially for getting started. One thing to note is that after like the first month, you really want to do it on much more of a like consistent basis, meaning like you're kind of doing it per the schedule. You're following, the guidelines in the portal. You're utilizing the playlists that we have specifically curated for each of those sessions, and kind of just really following as close as you can. Just through the program and the member portal, kind of, it walks you through each step. It breaks down, it has different session focuses, journaling prompts, breath work, meditation exercises, all kinds of great things for each time that you're doing a session. So all of that's in there. So know that, like I was saying before, is there is content, there's information, there are tutorial videos, everything in that member portal we have created, so you've essentially got all of that information and tools needed as you're going through that journey. So basically, that's kind of the first month. The idea here with ketamine is that it typically takes, and again, this is not a perfect science. It's kind of just a ballpark. It takes people typically around 6 to 8 sessions of like at that full dosage that you've worked yourself up to really be able to get enough of the medicine of what it's doing in your brain. It compounds each time that you're doing sessions, really to that point of where you can get to a full neurobiological reset, which is essentially, if you think about it, I have analogies for days. It's basically like the full neurobiological reset is like almost a control alt delete of the hard drive. It's like resetting all of your systems and establishing like this newfound baseline of self from there, which you can then be able to build and grow and choose the life that you want and choose to be the person you want versus having all of these things controlling you. And so some people, they can literally start to feel some of the benefits within, maybe the first session or two. Other people, it can take much, much longer. It's very, everybody is different. Like I was saying, is that it's one size does not fit all, and that's the reason we've created our program in this way. So essentially, like if you've been dealing with something for most of your life, let's just say, and you're coming to this treatment and you're like, okay, like I want to get started. Like how long is it going to take me to start, feeling better? The biggest thing that I think when it comes to mental health, especially with ketamine therapy, right? Most people, they're coming to us, they're like, I have tried everything. I've tried every different kind of medication, therapy, treatment. I mean, you name it. And nothing has ever really quite, stuck for me or worked, or, maybe it did, but it gave me only temporary relief, or it came with a ton of side effects, or, just it were just band-aids trying to cover up, essentially a gunshot wound, which we'll get into later. But basically, the idea is that as you're going through it, it starts small. We tend to focus on the big things that we're coming to this treatment for. I'm severely depressed. I have crippling anxiety. How do I get rid of these huge things? But the way that, we want that magic pill, of course, to just, happen overnight and fix us and heal us, because we've been dealing with it for, a decent amount of time and we want it to go away. But the way that this really works is it starts off slow, and it's the little things that kind of start trickling in little by little. And those small things, those start compounding into the bigger and the bigger and the bigger things. So I say this to patients probably every single day, and they don't really love it because it was definitely a hard pill to swallow. But that is that psychedelics, they tend to give us what we need, not necessarily what we want. And a lot of the times we have to go through the things that we need in order to get to the things that we want. And sometimes the things we want, we might not necessarily be able to see or know like what it is that we need to get there. We're just so fixated and focused on the thing that we want, but we're not ready to tackle or handle that. That's why in, say, for example, traditional talk therapy, when they bring up the significant trauma that you experienced, and all of a sudden you can feel yourself like, kind of shutting down or like seizing up, or, your heart starts pounding and you can feel your stomach drop, and it just, anxiety starts flooding through your body. It's because there's so much that you're just trying to skip to the end, but there's so much in between that needs to be processed and dealt with and covered before you're really ready to kind of face that big thing again. And that's really where ketamine is incredible, and being able to help kind of ease that journey along the way. So it's kind of like being able to dive into your subconscious and essentially having these things being brought up that are not usually the easiest or most wonderful things, but it allows you to start processing the information and the emotions, the thoughts, the feelings, everything that's been so deeply trapped inside of us. And it allows us to do that without that same emotional charge that we would normally have in, say, something like talk therapy, that would keep us from being able to even start trying to talk about it or process it. We just freeze up. And so this is really kind of, it's like quieting down that, monkey mind that we tend to spend the days, our day-to-days in. And it allows us to just turn that volume down and turn the volume up of our subconscious, and kind of just really get that great check-in with, what's going on inside of us, and facing some of these things. And it's really truly a unique
Mhm,
experience.
mhm.
But basically, that's kind of how it works. So like I said, some people, it can happen super fast. Like they could start feeling better within maybe a couple of weeks. Other people, it could take them a few months. It's just, it really depends on the person, right? Like if you think about it, it makes sense. If you've been dealing with something almost your whole life, it's probably going to take a little bit longer to undo and unlearn all of those things, that the certain way in which you have been functioning your whole life, having to just all of a sudden start changing all of that. It doesn't happen overnight. So it kind of makes sense. It happens, piece by piece. But what you can kind of expect is that in the beginning, it starts off usually little bits of, waking up, having more, increased motivation, having a bit more interest in doing certain kinds of things that you haven't had interest in doing in a while. A lot of people, like, say they get a ton of clarity in certain things. The two biggest ones I would say that people really start kind of noticing within maybe the first week or so, maybe first couple of weeks, I would say, depending on the person, of course, but is usually response to triggers. And instead of just immediately reacting when something happens, instead it kind of will give you that little bit of a beat or a pause to then be able to choose how to respond instead of just reacting. That's a huge one
Mhm.
people start noticing in the beginning, as well as that internal self talk, that dialogue going on in our head. It gets to be a little bit nicer. So, those are kind of some of the things
Yeah.
that start, that's where it sort of begins. And then it, like I said, those small things get to the bigger and the bigger and the bigger.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I'll just jump in real quick, Megan, with
yeah.
my experience. I noticed, the self talk that definitely resonates with me. Like I would be on job sites and kind of noticing that I would be allowing myself to be myself a lot more often. Is whereas we kind of get used to it. It becomes our just regular running machine of being self-conscious or like overanalyzing every single time we walk away from a conversation. We're like, oh, I wish I would have said this and I said this different, blah blah. And that could be like very, as much as we get used to it, it could be like very defeating and make us want, feel small in some sort of way. So I had a little bit of I noticed a lot, really a lot of freedom over the time, being able to like just notice that in conversations I was allowing myself to be who I was and not being so self-critical. And then
Yeah.
one other thing that was actually really cool, that this is something that took me a while to really like sit with and understand, because I experienced it. I had done a while back ago, I had done microdosing psilocybin, and I had a little bit of those effects. It took me a while to kind of understand and like correlate them with what I was feeling after the ketamine treatment too. But I had like a lot of suppression of anger. Like I didn't allow myself to feel. I was like, there's a lot of ways that I'd be, a people pleaser, and I hate conflict and all this stuff. But there'd be legitimate situations where it's like, man, like it's okay to get angry about this. Not that you need to flip tables and like, yell at anybody or anything like that, but there's a way that you got to allow that anger to process. I actually noticed after my first session, I was on a job site the next day. And that's also something I want to cover, like if we're able to go to work right afterwards and stuff too. Not afterwards, but the day after. But I was on a job site the day after, and there was, you know, we could avoid the details, but there was basically this guy that was causing a bunch of us who were, contractors to like be kind of wasting our day when we didn't need to be there. And he was just being super rude, and it kept adding up. And after a while, I was like, I was able to kind of like just be straight up with him and like kind of like cut the BS and kind of like stand up for myself. Again, I wasn't yelling at him. It's not like ketamine makes you mad or something. Like it was just me internally. My personal thing was I wasn't allowing anger or frustration, because I'm like, I don't want to get frustrated. I want to be a clear, kind, sweet, nice person, and those sorts of things, because I had learned, in various ways through my life, that that's how you belong, and you don't want to be ostracized, and you don't want to disrupt the flow of whatever. These are things that I didn't know that I was dealing with, was suppression of anger. And so I basically like was able to kind of step into, for lack of a less messy word, like my masculine side of myself at work, and kind of stand up for myself and tell them, hey, look, man, like you're being disrespectful to us, and we need to, like, let's just have this conversation. So I was not only able to kind of feel anger that I had been suppressing, which caught me off guard. I didn't know that was something that was going to come up. But I was also like less self-critical of myself. I didn't walk away just being really mad at myself, like, oh man, he didn't see you as sweet Jake Ryan's, like he's not gonna like you, you know. It was like it's okay to stand up for yourself. So just as like a caveat, you know, or you know, a sidestep of, we don't always know what's gonna come up, I think, with this. But it's so interesting to me to like discover and allow after these things and go, okay, that's what I was dealing with. Cool. This really gave me some space. And like you said, you know, I'm always talking about meditation and stuff on here. It gives you the space between stimulus and response. Like, so something happens and you respond to it. It gives you like a little bit of like, okay, before I respond to this, I have a little bit of space to like gather myself and respond adequately. So just like a little
Yeah.
bit of my personal side. But yeah, so carry on. Let's go with just because I had just mentioned it. Someone did have a question that they had asked me about. So we can go to work the next day. So we can like we don't take this every single day. And if you could also describe why is there a few days in between? Why do we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, all great questions. So, essentially, ketamine is an incredibly safe drug. You can take ketamine once a week for the rest of your life and have no long-term issues, no damage, no nothing. It really boils down to dosage and frequency. So, in terms of, you if you start, of course, you don't want to be doing ketamine every day. That's really where it gets dangerous. It can cause issues with the bladder. It can cause, like issues with your brain. It's not good, and that's you don't want to be doing that.
I don't think
So
you'd want to anyway. Like it's
yeah,
such
it's
like I feel like I want that couple days to like, wow, that was like intense. I want to, you know, sit with that for a second.
absolutely. Well, that's the other thing too, right? Is that you want the ketamine, you really want to allow it to kind of work itself throughout your system and let it do its thing. Because typically the way it works is from whenever it is that you do the session, after about 24 hours after, that's really when the antidepressant effects start to peak. And so that's when people can really start to notice, some of those, just kind of changed thought patterns or with that little bit of clarity or just feeling a bit lighter in a sense, even if they can't necessarily pinpoint exactly what it is that like they are feeling, they just feel a bit better than they did. So it's really important to let the medicine work itself out. And so basically with our program, you can either do a session once a week or twice a week. You always want to make sure, let's just say you're doing the twice a week, you want to, at the very bare minimum, give yourself at the very least 3 to 5 days between the sessions. That way, it allows the medicine to work itself through your body. Also, lets your body kind of heal a little bit up. And yeah, then that way, also, you're not building up the tolerance very quickly, because that's another thing with ketamine that even if you're doing it, with the twice a week or once a week, it's one of the most common things we see is that tolerance can build up very quickly. And that's normal. It's just kind of how the medicine works. But definitely just, in terms of safety, we have a lot of safety data over the past, few years that Better U has been, up and running from just the patients that we have seen. But we also have some other, like I believe, trials and places that we have been collecting and gathering safety data from for many other years before we started Better U. So we have a lot of information on, just the safety and efficacy of it, but really it boils down to, like I said, that dosage and frequency. So making sure that if you're doing the once a week program, you're doing a session about every 5 to 7 days. If you're doing it twice a week, it's about every 3 to 5 days, somewhere around there. In terms of when you're doing the session, can I go to work afterwards? Can I drive afterwards? So the answer to all of these things, it really heavily depends on when you're doing the session and kind of just how you feel, how you respond to it. So let's just say, for example, that you're doing the session after work in the evening. Typically, we recommend people that if you are going to do that, try to do it as early in the evening as possible, because typically people can kind of fall into around two camps. The first being that when you come out of the experience, ketamine, it really kind of turns your mind on. Your brain can just feel very switched on, and it can make it a little bit more challenging to fall asleep or even stay asleep. Other people, when they come out of it, it can just put you down and they actually get the best sleep that they've had in a while. So until you kind of know which one you fall into, if you're trying to do it super late at night, it's just then it could interrupt you, your sleep going into the next day. And then, of course, if you have work that following day, being super groggy or tired. In terms of like, if you were doing that session in the evening, even if you did it a bit earlier in the evening, usually I'd say like probably 6, 7, 7:30ish latest. I mean, it really just depends on what time it is you typically go to bed. I usually will say give yourself at least like 3.5 hours, 4 almost, from whenever it is you're going to start that session to like when you normally go to bed, because that's typically how long, if you're ingesting the medicine, it will take for it to kind of process through your body. There's a couple of differences in terms of side effects, feeling things the next day, can I go to work after, things like that. So basically, we have two ways that people do the medicine. People can either ingest it or they can spit it out. So essentially, how it works is it's an oral troche or a lozenge. Basically, troche is kind of a fun, weird word, but that's the clinical term. You can just call it a lozenge. That's essentially the same thing. So they come in these little squares. They are flavored. We have a couple different flavor options available. So trust me, that definitely makes the experience much better, because you put the medicine in your mouth and you have to be sitting upright and you're basically kind of biting and chewing down on the little lozenges. You want to get them to dissolve as quickly as possible. And then essentially, once they've completely disintegrated or dissolved into that liquid saliva, without swallowing, you're essentially going to be holding all of that saliva in your mouth like a chipmunk, like for about 10-15 minutes or so. And the reason for this is that when the oral absorption, that's primarily where you're going to be getting the psychedelic effects from the medicine. It's when you go to actually ingest it, that's where you're going to be getting more of the analgesic or the pain relief benefits. So for example, we have a lot of patients that have chronic pain. And a lot of the times chronic pain is accompanied by depression because that pain takes a humongous mental toll. So we see that very, very often. But basically, we aren't prescribing ketamine for chronic pain, but it is kind of almost like a byproduct that can help that chronic pain a little bit while it's being used for the treatment of the depression or the anxiety essentially. But if you struggle with chronic pain, as I do, then typically those patients will ingest the medicine after about that 10-15 minutes of holding all of that saliva in their mouth. And basically, there's a few differences. When you ingest the medicine, it's going to make the duration of how long you're really feeling the effects of the medicine. It's probably going to make it last a bit longer. So typically, a session is somewhere around about 45 minutes to usually somewhere around maybe an hour and a half. That's kind of like the ballpark window. Sometimes it's right at that 45-minute mark. Other times it's, a little bit longer. It just kind of depends on the day, the time. There's a ton of little variables that go into this, but essentially, if you do ingest it, it's probably going to be a little bit closer to that hour and a half. If you're spitting it out, probably will be closer to about that 45 minutes to an hour, just to give you kind of an idea. Now, of course, not a perfect science. That's just sort of that baseline of just ballparking it pretty much. So that's the first thing. It's going to make that session last a bit longer. The second is it's probably going to make you feel like you're going a bit deeper into the experience. And the reason for this is that when you're orally absorbing that medicine for that 10-15 minutes, you're absorbing about 25% of the total amount of medicine that you were prescribed by the clinician. So it's when you go to ingest it, you're absorbing about 10% extra, which is the reason why, of course, probably going to feel a little bit more. But now it's going through your digestive tract, in your stomach being metabolized. So the reason it can make it last longer is because now you're getting that second kind of absorption. But additionally, it's going to be getting processed by the liver and kidneys for up until about 3 hours. So if you ingest the medicine after about probably 45 minutes to an hour from ingesting it, you can almost get a little bit of a second wave in a sense. So even if you're not fully under the experience and you're kind of, coming out of it, sometimes you can get, a little bit of that second wave where you'll feel, kind of some of those effects coming back in a little bit. So the way that well, basically that's the second thing with the ingesting. The third thing is that basically it can make you a little bit more susceptible to some of the more not so wonderful side effects. That could include anything from a bit of increased nausea to a bit of an upset stomach. Of course, the prolonged feeling, kind of the effects of the medicine longer to kind of really return back to that full baseline, as well as some people could get a not like a very not wonderful headache. Other people the next day could feel a bit hungover. It's not guaranteed that any of these things will happen. It's just something that we have seen. Everybody's different. Some people can ingest, we prescribe as high as 800 milligrams per session. And we have some patients that are taking that full 800, ingesting it, and they have zero side effects. At the same time, you could also have somebody that is taking what the typical standard doses that people initially start off with, which is about 400 milligrams. Like that's what is initially prescribed, not initially starting off with. But we have people that will try doing the ingesting at 400 and they get horrible side effects. And so we always, in that first month, it's really about playing around with it. I typically will recommend, if people want to try ingesting, to start off doing that at a lower dose. So when we start people off between 1 to 200 milligrams for the first session. That's really a good training wheels, kind of just, like I said, getting your feet wet before jumping into the deep end, and getting you comfortable and familiar. And a little side note, the reason that we do this is because, as with the IV, if somebody has never had any kind of experience with ketamine or psychedelics, and you there's naturally a lot of fear or misconceptions or stigmas, things that have you've read or heard about just over the years. Ketamine has been around since the early 60s, so there's just so much history with it, and just negative things that are associated with it. But when you're first coming to it, of course, it's natural to have a bit of anxiety, or, oh my gosh, like you're expecting it to be this whole great big thing. And that's why we start you off very, very small. So you can really kind of start with those training wheels. And then as soon as you feel safe and comfortable, can be able to then increase little by little up until that dosage that the clinician prescribed you. So that's kind of how that part of it works. But essentially, if you're doing the ingesting method, typically it just kind of depends. If you're going to try to ingest it, I recommend trying to do that first at around like the 200 to 300 milligrams. Just kind of see how you feel, see how you respond. If you don't have any bad side effects, by all means, you can absolutely ingest it. It's totally fine. It's totally safe. It's really just more about personal preference.
You guys also sent, sorry to interrupt, Megan. You guys also sent, I forget the name of it. It's like for your stomach, like if you have an upset stomach. Yeah. So you guys also sent that too, and that seemed to be beneficial. I think my first 2 times I didn't use it because I'm like, I think I'm tough or something. But I was honestly fine both times. So the first 2 times I didn't do it. And then after that, I ended up taking it like just as a little extra thing, and I felt that both times I was totally fine. And I think that my first maybe half times I spit it out, and then the other times I ingested it, and I didn't really. I mean, after the session, there's like you do feel like a little bit nauseous, of course, like your motor functions aren't all there, so just even walking to the bathroom is a little tough, that sort of thing. But just from my personal experience, I didn't feel any insane side effects, and I was taking 400 milligrams was my dose for my trip. So just
good. Like I said, that's very typical starting dosage that I would say probably 80% of new patients that they will initially get prescribed to start off there.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, the only reason somebody would get initially starting off or prescribed a higher dosage would be there are certain kinds of medications that can interact with ketamine, in the sense, not dangerously, it's more in the sense that they make it so like what it's doing in your brain is you're not going to be able to feel the full effects of the ketamine as much, just because it's kind of blocking it. That's things like stimulants, like, any kind of an ADHD medication, caffeine, things like that, as well as any kind of, benzodiazepines, like anxiety medication, sleeping meds. There's a couple other ones as well. So that's when you're meeting with that clinician initially, they go over that with you. And based on medications that you're taking, previous experience with ketamine or not, they determine, they essentially customize the dosage that's going to work the best for you, of what they have determined based on that appointment is going to work
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. You do have a good, from my experience, you have like a good conversation back and forth with somebody, to just kind of like get a base of where you're at with all of it, what medications you're on. So can you be on SSRIs and take
Yep.
these and have good benefits?
Ketamine and antidepressants they work very, very well together. Actually, believe it or not, the Spravato that I mentioned earlier, the FDA approved version of ketamine, that's the nasal spray that has to be done in office. Typically, that is actually done in combination with an oral antidepressant. So, what I've seen, and actually from my own personal experience, when I first came to ketamine therapy, I was on, antidepressants. I was on anxiety medication, sleeping medication, just for all of the different, things that I was dealing with. And through ketamine, it has helped me to get off of basically every single thing that I was on for years. And it's an incredibly common thing, you believe it or not. We've
It's
seen
so
so
cool.
many
So
patients
cool.
that they're like, the reasons I was taking this medication, I've dealt with it. It's not a thing. Like, I have more personal strength, and like, I know that, it's okay to not be okay. It's not always going to be good or bad. It's just, this is life. It's the management of the ebbs and flows of things. And so it's allowing people to, have that freedom of not always, when something happens, oh, I have to go, reach for a pill. And it's that reliance on an external source that we're relying on to feel a certain way. And that's really what ketamine is incredible for, is it's trying to help us make the shift from, the external to internal, to internal to external. And so it's giving us the tool, like with our program, it gives you the tools, and, to really maximize, not only just what the ketamine is doing, but essentially our goal is to make you your own, like, pretty much like self-soother, self-healer,
Mm.
giving you, your own therapist in a sense, like just kind of understanding and figuring out that roadmap of self. I did want to jump really quick back to the nausea medicine. So that is something, it's called Zofran or ondansetron. We send that to everybody. It's basically, it's it's a benign medication. You're not going to feel any effects from it. It's really more of just a preventative for any kind of nausea, even if never get nauseous or anything like that. It's just there as, to take if you want. Usually we recommend it in the beginning. Some people can get really, really nauseous from this. Other people have no issues. It's just, you don't know until you try. So that is something that is included with it. So I wanted to throw
What?
that in.
Yeah. That's great. What is your guys' recommendation again as far as food? I remember my first 400 milligram session. I was just, because a lot of this is like the prep work that goes into it. It's not just the trip. It's not just the ketamine therapy. Like, it's your day of the journaling that you do before. I really wanted to like be really at a good state, so I went and worked out. I went on like a little run at this place I really like in Austin. I was just like listening to good content on my phone. I just really wanted to be in this great space. One thing I also did was I was fasting. I don't know if you guys like recommend or not recommend, and this is just my own personal thing, but I was on like a short, it was intermittent, so it was probably like 16 to 18 hours of fasting, and that was like one of the more profound, beautiful, blissful, like self-love based trips,
Yeah.
for me as far as the ketamine session. So what do you guys normally recommend as far as food, and have you heard other people talk about being in a fasted state and having good or bad benefits at all?
Absolutely. So I'm happy you brought that up, because that's another thing for, like, when I was earlier talking about doing sessions in the evening, and then going into that next day for work, you definitely can go to work the next day as long as you know, feel good, you don't feel like you're still under the influence of it. But when you fast, there's a few reasons that we always want you to fast. We require that you fast for, at the very bare minimum, at least 3-4 hours, I would say, prior to doing the session. The first reason for this is that if you have any food in your stomach that's, you know, kind of being processed, it can make you much more nauseous. So that's the kind of really the biggest one first. The second, though, is that anything else that's in your system, the ketamine is essentially going to be kind of fighting with to be absorbed. So it increases your ability for your body to really absorb the medicine. And so the reason why you probably had such a profound and incredible experience was because you had fasted for that much longer and there was absolutely nothing in your body. So one thing that I always will recommend to people, if say they're doing the sessions typically in the evening and that, you know, that you replicated the process, done everything exactly the same. And they're just, you know, some people can be like, it started off really strong and then I kind of started not feeling it as much. That's, you know, it could be a few things, could be, you know, tolerance and, you know, might need to increase that dosage a little bit. But a lot of the times I'm like, what did you eat that day? And they're like, well, I had a hamburger for lunch, but I fasted for a few hours. I'm like, okay, well, you know, even if you fasted for, you know, those few hours, there can still be like little remnant bits and pieces that your stomach is, you know, trying to break down. So we will always recommend on the day of the session to eat very clean, light, you know, leafy greens, grains, just, you know, nothing too heavy. Additionally, we always say that try to avoid liquids for about 2 hours prior. If, of course, you know, we're not saying you can't have anything, maybe just like, you know, a couple little sips of water here and there, but, you know, don't be chugging a whole drink of any kind. Reason for this is that ketamine is a little bit of a diuretic. It can kind of make you feel like you need to pee a bit more. And especially like you mentioned earlier, when, you know, you're coming out of that session and you're still, you know, kind of, you know, a bit out of it, a bit dizzy.
It's hard to get to the bathroom.
Yeah, so I'm happy you brought that up because one thing that we do require in the beginning, especially, is that you need to have a peer monitor there with you, somebody that basically their job and their role is they're not going to be in the same room as you, but pretty much they're going to be handling everything else happening in the house. So like say if you have pets or if you have kids or, you know, whatever it is, they're going to be in charge of handling everything else and making sure that you, like where you are in, you know, the room or whatever it is, the dark and, you know, quiet space you're doing that session, they're going to make sure you're not going to be getting interrupted by any kind of external source. So that's kind of what their role is, so you can really go into that session, because any sort of like external thing going on in these sessions, it can just pull you out of it because it's a very internal journey inward. When you're lying down, you have an eye mask as well as headphones on. So that's kind of really putting you just like straight into this, you know, kind of internal journey inward. So like if you feel touch, if you feel sound, anything like that, movement, that can, you know, just pull you out of that internal journey into back that external environment. So that's the role of that peer monitor in that sense. But additionally, they're there for, let's just say if in the session you get a little bit nervous, or if you want somebody knowing you're not alone, it really can be very calming and, you know, helping with the nerves if you have any nerves. But the other biggest real job of that peer monitor is when you've come out of the session, that if you need to get up and use the restroom, they're helping you, holding, you know, your arm, they're helping you to the restroom, because really the biggest safety concern with this is falling. And so that's really kind of the biggest priority, is making sure you do have that person there with you to help you to the restroom. But the reason also for that, you know, not having liquids for those couple hours prior is just because, again, it can make you feel like you need to pee a bit more. And so our goal is by the time you're sitting down and starting the session, ideally you won't really need to be having to get up or do anything for about an hour and a half to 2 hours, give or take. Because when you come out of that session, essentially you're not done. You're not just like getting up and, you know, going about your day. You're going to be sitting there for at least another, 30, 45 minutes, just, depending on how long you're still feeling the effects of it. But B, what we have you do when you come out of it is we call it the post-reflection stage. So essentially, you're sitting there. You can either pull out the journal that you received in the brain box that we send you and start basically just writing about your experience, whatever came up for you, what you saw, how it made you feel, whatever it is, kind of just reflecting on that experience. Now, of course, sometimes you can be still heavily feeling the effects of ketamine. And I can tell you from my own personal experience, trying to sit and write in a journal, coming out of it,
Yeah.
it looked like kindergartner just scratch it. For some reason, it's because it messes with your motor functions. It's like I could not write to save my life. And so what I recommend for people that if they experience that is you can just pull out your phone and start audio recording yourself.
Mm.
Additionally, in the member portal that we have, it's both a web app as well as we have a mobile app that you can access everything directly from your phone. So it's super convenient, and it has a journaling function in there. So you can even, open that and just start, dictating, verbally dictating into that journaling entry in there if you want. However it is you do it, whether it's physically writing, speaking or dictating, just so long as you're reflecting and, kind of recording, getting that experience out. The reason for that is that you really want to be able to come back and re-listen or reread these experiences. It's because you're doing some pre-session journaling. There's intentions, there's session focuses that we can prompt you with in the portal as you're working through it. So the idea is that as you're kind of working through doing each of your sessions, you're able to really track how you're feeling going into it, how you feel when you come out of it. Typically, we'll recommend about maybe the following day or maybe 2 days after you do the session, come back to that journal and reread what you wrote. Ask yourself the question, do I still feel the same? If so, that's okay. Maybe there's a little bit more there that I need to uncover. If not, then how do I feel different? In what ways do I feel better? That's really going to help you to kind of start piecing together the puzzle essentially in your journey onto that new you or that
Yeah.
better, so to
That
speak.
better you. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say too, from my experience, I feel like you guys did a really great job at the journal prompts. I really liked the
Thank
journal
you.
prompts. I found myself. I mean, I'm a writer in general. I like writing a lot already, so maybe it was like more natural to me. But man, I felt like once I started going, like you answer the first question and you're like kind of thinking about it. Okay, cool, and you get some stuff out, and then you keep going. I mean, I found myself just lightning fingers on my keyboard. I was like, oh, I really like these prompts. These are really cool. Um,
For
so
value.
yeah, yeah, it really did. And it was really cool to like realize how much I wrote or like allowing myself to feel those things that I wrote out.
Yeah.
Another thing, so this was actually a question that I had for, I forget, maybe it was Brendan. I talked to somebody else.
Brendan.
Yeah, yeah,
Brendan.
yeah. So I talked to him. One of my main questions was, okay, so, and this was before my first session. I was like, okay, so I'm going to write this journal prompt stuff. This is things that come up. Maybe I am or I am not aware of these certain things that are plaguing me inside. Here's why I'm doing this in the first place. I asked him, I'm like, so while I'm under the session, am I supposed to attack these things that I wrote about? Am I supposed to try to intentionally bring those up? I was very like curious about that, and he was like, no, don't worry about it. Don't try to control it. And I was confused at first, like, well, how does it make sense that I'm bringing these things up and then they're getting solved if I'm like, basically what does the trip have to do with these things that are apparently harming me, or things that I journal about? And I found that to be very interesting. If you can go to that, so basically like, how does the stuff you're journaling about in the trip, like what do those have to do with each other? I guess even more broadly, how the heck does tripping on ketamine in a comfortable, safe environment, how does that heal our depression? How does
Yeah.
that?
Great question. So that's actually, believe it or not, one of the biggest things that I would say most patients struggle with. It's the art of letting go. And so the whole idea with this is that, and I'll give you an analogy for kind of how to essentially you want to approach the session. So before you go into it, the reason we have you doing that pre-session journaling, setting an intention, writing out, answering some of those questions is essentially the idea of what we're trying to do is we're trying to get whatever it is that's been going on in your mind, whatever you've been thinking, whatever you've been feeling. These are just, you don't absolutely have to use those things that are in there. They're merely just there as suggestions if you don't really know where to start. Like I said, you can really kind of customize this treatment for what you need. But typically, most people are like, I've never journaled in my life. Like, I don't know where to start. Like, what do I write about? Like, hi, like, welcome to my inner like mind or something, right? Like people just don't know where to start. So that's why we give you those prompts and those tools to utilize if you need a bit more of that guidance. But the idea is essentially to just whatever it is that you're feeling. I always recommend people give yourself, even if you don't use all of it, give yourself like about a 30-minute window prior to when you're going to start the session to sit down and write, answer some of these journal prompts, set your intentions, clear out the space in your mind. Think of your mind as kind of like a hard drive, right? We're trying, when there's too many different programs or software or files on the computer, it starts short circuiting, it starts overheating, it starts slowing down, it's not functioning or firing properly. So the whole idea is that in order to get prepping the computer to really kind of be able to work, and have the software work efficiently or effectively, I guess, is you're trying to clear out some of that space on the hard drive. So, that's essentially, when you're writing these things out, you're getting it out of your mind so it can live somewhere else outside of you. Because oftentimes, when we have all of these different thoughts and feelings spiraling around inside of us, we can't really make sense as to, what things connect or like why there's the three things. There's the what, why, and the where. A lot of the times we'll only have one or two out of the three, but if we don't have all three of the pieces for whatever a problem is, then that's where we can start to get, overwhelmed trying to figure it out. And the best way for our brains to be able to articulate what our thoughts and our emotions are trying to say essentially is really through physically writing with a pen and paper. And I think the reason for this is that when you're texting or when you're typing on a computer or even just talking, you can you're able to do those things much faster. You can add fillers, you can kind of tend to go off down rabbit holes, as I tend to do often. But when you're physically writing pen to paper, you're thinking about what you're writing, every word that you're writing down. You're not just scribbling down every little thing, because it would take forever to write all of that. So it's kind of like a way of filtering out all of that excess noise and just really getting out the true thoughts and feelings that you're experiencing. And so the idea of the pre-session journaling is to really just clear your mind, clear out that mental space so you can go into the session feeling lighter and not having all of that information kind of circling around. Because the more that you're thinking about it, or it's, you're experiencing it, the harder it's going to be for you to really be able to essentially let go and, not be, so kind of just like engulfed or encompassed in all of that chaos going on in that monkey mind. So the idea is, do the journaling, get this stuff out of your mind, clear your head. One of the most powerful things to do prior to a session is some, light breath work. It's incredible for just clearing out that, the last minute things spiraling around in your mind, or, letting go of some tension and just kind of shaking out any little last bits of anxiety. It's incredible. It just kind of helps you to drop right into that state you want to be in going into it. So after you do the journaling, you set the intentions, the idea is to let all of it go. Clear your mind, take some deep breaths, and essentially just sort of surrender into the experience.
Trust,
so
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And we have those few mantras. We have, the breathe, the trust, let go, and be open, right? So trusting or breathing, of course, connecting to your breath, trust the experience, trust yourself, trust the medicine, let go of any expectations that you might have, anything that you want to get out of this, anything that you're trying to work on, just letting go of all of that. And then the last, being open to a new experience, letting whatever it is that happens happen and not closing off from it. And so that's kind of the mantras that we always say to repeat to yourself before going into it. And so when you then go into the session, this is the analogy I always will give to patients is imagine that you are in a car and essentially the music that you're listening to, these pre-curated playlists that we have created, all of that is, in
They're so
the
good too. They're so good. I love them.
thank you, thank you. We really spent a lot of time making sure that what we were putting in there was very thoughtful and was going to be able to deliver a certain kind of experience. So basically, the music, aside from the medicine itself, I would say the music is probably the most important aspect of the session because essentially that music is going to be the driver of the car. The music is responsible for navigating you from point A to point B, getting you from, again, same thing from point A to point B. So the music is the driver of the car. You essentially want to be the passenger that's, sitting in the car, looking out the window, hearing the music, and kind of just observing and experiencing the journey, basically, and not trying to navigate or backseat drive like, oh no, you were supposed to turn left here, like you were supposed to go there. And it's like, no, like they got this, they got GPS, like the music, it's handling it, like it's got you covered. You don't need to worry about this, right? And so that's a really huge thing that a lot of people really struggle with is, especially having gone through your entire life, always having to try to be in that essentially like state of control. So that's really where ketamine is incredible for helping us with depression and with anxiety, because oftentimes what happens is when certain things, emotions, thoughts, just, trauma, pain, when things come up and when we start dealing with them, it makes us feel like we are out of control because we're feeling these things are happening, we're thinking certain things that we're like, oh my gosh, like what's going on? This is too much. And like I don't know what's going on with me, right? And so that makes us naturally want to try to control ourselves even more and push those feelings down and get back into that seat of control. And so, especially a lot of, kind of type A personalities, it's like, this is how I work. Like when I'm not in control, I freak out. And so it's definitely harder, I would say, for those people, but it's a learned practice. The more that you can get comfortable in essentially letting go and surrendering, not trying, like letting the experience kind of take you and show you what it's trying to show you. Like if you remember earlier, psychedelics, they tend to give us what we need, not necessarily what we want. And we have to allow it to show us and guide us so that, like, a lot of the times I'll seriously be talking to patients and they're like, I was going through this, a session and this thing came up and I was, at first, I was scared or I was trying to go away for it, or this other thing came up that it was an intention or it was something that I had wanted to come up and I was trying to run towards it. When I did that, then what started happening is you're trying to go back and getting into that conscious mind. The whole idea with these sessions is to quiet down and kind of separate yourself from that conscious mind so you can dive into that subconscious and just see what you're holding on to, what's actually happening inside of you. And so that's really how it helps with the depression and anxiety, is that it allows us to let go of that seat of control, realizing that everything is going to be okay. I don't have to be in control of everything in order to, feel a certain way. In fact, the more that I am trying to be in control, the less that I am able to actually get to be my most authentic self. And trust me, it took me some time to, kind of really be able to get to that point. But like I said, it's something that gets easier and better with the more and more practice that you do. So it's definitely something that people are gonna have some trouble with, but we're here to kind of help you and guide you as you go through the journey. So just know that it is possible.
Yeah, huge. I mean, that was something for me, is like the constant, the mantra of allow, accept, okay. it's fine. I mean, and I feel like that is such an ultimate key with all of this, because it actually kind of ends up correlating to the rest of your life, where I was talking about, I get self-conscious, or I wish I wasn't like this. It's like, you are like this. It's okay too. Like you're not an awful, but doesn't mean this, whatever this
Yeah.
allowing. I think that all the preparation and the, with psychedelic therapy, psychedelics in general, the biggest thing, I mean, science tells us that, experience tells us this. Anything that doesn't even have to do with therapy, anything about psychedelics, what you'll hear constantly is set and setting, and that is obviously your environment, your diet mentally, and like, the things you're listening to that day, the like avoid the news that day, that sort of thing. The environment being set up in a way, and you check all these boxes, and okay, I did my journaling, I made my bed before I laid in it, I'm in a safe space, I trust that I have these 2 hours, I put my phone in airplane mode, nobody's gonna knock on the door. Like, you set your environment up to where you can continuously check back in, because sometimes you get, just to reuse your car analogy, like sometimes the music takes you on like a dirt road, and you're
Yeah.
like, well, this is okay, is this,
Rough
I would
terrain.
find myself, I find myself asking, like, is this too much? And it, like, I would go back again to, like, because when you're under the session, there is, to some extent, some awareness of your body and these sorts of things too. So I could go check in. Okay, I'm still in my bed. Yeah, I got the blindfold on. Yeah, I'm still listening to music. Okay, I'm gonna trust that these people like set me up for success. I'm gonna trust that the journaling I did put me in a safe, mental environment. I know I locked the door for sure before I did this. So there's like this checking in of, can I trust this? Can I accept this? Can I allow this? Yep. Okay. I'm still good. And then, within 20 seconds, you forgot what you were even just kind of like tensing up about for a minute, and it's just, it's huge, because I feel like you'll hear it a lot. This is something I used to say often, was, I'm a control person. I like to be in control.
Mhm.
I was like the typical person who, like, you go to a restaurant and, like, I don't have my back to the door. I don't sit with my back to the door, like those sorts of things. And you think that you're making your life better and freeing yourself more by trying to control it all the time. But there's really a lot of overlay with this allowing during the session that comes into play in your everyday life. And I found that to be a huge, profound thing for me, was this: it's okay to not have control of everything all the time. You're going to be fine. Allow it, accept it, so that might be something other people have come up, is this,
Oh,
you don't have to control it all.
absolutely. Oh, absolutely. One of the things I love telling people is that, the universe, it's got a mind of its own, right? It's going to do its thing no matter what you try to do or what you try to control. Essentially, like, all that any of us have any real control over is ourself, the way that we react, the way that we respond to things. Anything outside of us, we can try to think or, trick ourselves into believing we have control over it. But the reality is that we have no control. It's,
Mm.
we're kidding ourselves
There's
into.
freedom in that too.
Yeah, there's so much freedom, and it's the idea. I have this quote that I really do live by, and that's that I think that in life it's about 10% of what happens to you and 90% how you react or respond to things. Because, like I said, things are just going to happen without, you could not have prepared for it. There's absolutely nothing that you could have done to avoid it or change it. Just, that's kind of the way of the world, right? The world, it's got a mind of its own. It's going to keep on spinning. So why get out and push, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
going to keep doing its own thing. You don't need to get out there and be trying to, move mountains. It's essentially everything. It's having a trust in that, knowing everything has a reason, a purpose, whether we know what that reason or purpose is in the moment. Oftentimes, it's the kind of thing where, in it's only really in, hindsight, that you can see that, okay, the reason when this happened, the reason that this didn't work out was because, down the road I was supposed to, do this or go this way, and if I had gone that way, I would not have gone this way. And so it's, of course, in the moment when we're trying to do something and it's not working out, or we're, experiencing friction, it's of course frustrating, and we're like, why isn't this working? Like, I put everything into this is what I'm supposed to be doing. But it's really just, kind of accepting that, okay, like, I might not know the reason yet, but it will reveal itself in time. How much time? Who knows? It could be, a day, a week, could be a couple of years. It's just, it's about really trusting that everything works itself out in some way, shape, or form, that, we will be okay. And another thing too, I actually wanted to touch on that I love that you brought up is that when you were in that session and all of a sudden you could kind of feel some of that little bit of tension or that anxiety of like, oh no, oh no, oh no, kind of bubbling to the surface. That's a huge thing that we always will tell people. If ever at any point in a session you feel overwhelmed, you feel nervous, you feel like, oh my gosh, like this is too much, don't ever try to take the eye mask or the headphones off, really. I mean, you could take the headphones off if the music is too much and just kind of like, but don't take that eye mask off. The reason for this is that when you are under the influence of the medicine, of course, you're in this whole experience and it's, the unnormal. But when you're taking that eye mask off or the headphones, you essentially, like, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get back into that normal where you are
Mhm.
comfortable, where you're not experiencing all of this stuff. But the problem is that because you're still under the effects of the medicine, your normal is going to be distorted and very unnormal. So that can actually make you have more anxiety, more, kind of worked up. And so really, it's, of course, that's our first natural instinct is we want to just, oh my gosh, this is too much, like I need to get out of it. But it's not like a VR headset where you take it off and you're out of the experience, right?
Mhm.
It's like, no, this is like, a medicine that you have taken, you're still under the effects of it. So it's very important to just be like, conscious and aware of that. And so the way in which to do it is if you start feeling that anxiety coming up in that session, is essentially just connecting to your breath. Your breath is going to be your best anchor for, kind of reconnecting to your body, remembering that, you are safe, you are okay, and this is all temporary. This too shall pass. And I'll usually say, take one hand, put it over your heart, one hand, put it over your stomach.
Mm.
And as long as you can feel the rise and fall, as long as you're breathing, you are safe and you are okay. And I think that, like, I've had a lot of people that I've worked with that, they had a couple of those sessions where they were really overwhelmed. It was a lot. And they were like, oh my gosh, like I was kind of freaking out a little bit. And so after me getting, this is kind of like some of the calls that I get to do with patients is, kind of helping and walking them through these kind of bits of experiences. And when they've come back to me and they're like, yeah, I had something that was coming back up again a little bit. And I tried that. And, of course, in my mind, I was like, oh, there's no way that's going to work. Like, just breathing, like everybody tells me to breathe, like that's not going to make me feel better. But believe it or not, just feeling, trusting that, the medicine, trusting that you are safe, you are okay, and just reconnecting to that breath. They're like, I was really able to anchor myself back, knowing that, like, I was okay, as long as I'm breathing, I am all right. And they were able to then, like you said, after, maybe a couple of minutes or so, kind of catching that breath, calming back down, and they were able to then, go on with that session. And so that's kind of how, of course, not every session is always going to be sunshines and rainbows. A lot of the times, the things that we are holding on to, our pain, our trauma, these things, it's meant to kind of bring these things to the surface. But like I said, it's allowing you to be able to kind of confront these things without that same emotional, like, toll, basically. So that doesn't mean that there's not going to be any kind of emotional toll with it. It just means it's not going to be at the same level that, in a normal setting of just trying to talk about it, where you're not even able to, like, think about it without completely, like, shutting down. So that's kind of like the difference of it's allowing us to start in real time processing and working through these things instead of just kind of it comes up and, we retreat or we back down. And so that's really how it's allowing us to face these things, process it, work through it, so that we can all of a sudden let go of it and be free of it, right? It's if it's a skeleton in the closet, it can always come back and get us at any time until, we've gone in And, we've taken a big hammer to the skeleton, and now all of a sudden it's in pieces, and bye-bye, you're gone. Like I don't have to worry about you anymore. And that's kind of how ketamine therapy works with that anxiety and the depression. It's giving people the ability to, instead of like traditional antidepressants or anxiety medications or all of these things, they're designed to essentially just kind of like turn the volume down on all of these things that we're experiencing. And it's kind of just like a almost avoidance mechanism of, oh gosh, this is bubbling to the surface, okay, like let's quiet that back down and avoid it. It's not dealing with it. And that's why people then become reliant and dependent on these medications and can find themselves being on them for many years and are unable to ever get off of them, because as soon as they start trying to, all of those emotions, those things, they've been there the whole time. You've just been suppressing it. So now when you start trying to come off of it, naturally you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed. This is too much. Like I can't deal with this. So this is kind of really where it helps you to actually deal with these things so that you can let go and move on and essentially ultimately be free.
Yes. Yeah. Be free indeed. I love that saying. That's a huge thing. That's like you feel free of the things that you thought you needed to do or have or hold on to for so
Yeah.
long. They become, I was using the analogy yesterday when we talked about like the armor we put on, I think a lot of us, whether we have something we consider trauma or not, through experiences, through life, through, happenstance, through circumstance, we put on these versions of ourselves. We harden up, we shape up, we put on armor to protect ourselves from them ever happening again. But through a lot of this healing, real healing, not just like putting a muzzle on something that still has teeth, there is I don't know. There's a freedom of allowing it to be there. In the sessions, definitely do that. I'll say sorry about the noise for any listeners in Megan. It sounds like they're building battle robots outside of my apartment here. One question that came up. I don't know how to word this. I hope I'm not being insensitive by saying it, but it's something that I went through too. Even years ago, like before I had even done it, like any sort of psychedelics or dove in really heavily into like breath work or, even like smoking a lot of cannabis back in the day. What do you have to say about people who are afraid that they might like have a like psychological break? If they're afraid that they might like, oh, this is the thing, like I know I've always been crazy and this is what's going to push me over. I think that's something we really alienate ourselves with. We think that we're really alone with that, but the more and more I talk to people, the more and more I really assess my own experience. I think that's a pretty common thing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if you've heard this from other people. Like we're afraid like, oh, I can't do psychedelics because it's going to like break my mind and I'll never come back down. We're afraid of cutting that tether into the great abyss. So have you had experience talking with people about this? Like, well, what if I go crazy? What's your response to that?
Absolutely. That's a huge thing, believe it or not. Like I said, society, there's been so many horror stories out there and, so many things that they've been trying to, put into our minds for years of, oh, psychedelics, they're going to make you go crazy and lose your mind. But believe it or not, it's actually the things like they got it backwards. Essentially, the things that they told us are safe and are going to heal us are making us go crazy and is killing us. And the things that they told us were going to make us lose our minds and go crazy are the things that are actually healing us and helping us. So they got it backwards. You got to flip that script. And it's the kind of thing where, it really, what it boils down to is being open-minded, right? Like you never know if something is truly going to work for you or not until you are open to give it a try, right? And so like I have a ton of friends still that we've been doing this for the basically like past 2.5 years. And like, I'm like, I know that if they would, try this, that it would help them astronomically. I'm like, I could feel it like almost in my bones, but it's the kind of thing where, you can't push somebody towards this if they are adamant about not doing it and they're, set in stone. You kind of have to allow, like what makes this effective is people need to kind of come to it on their own. And the way that you can almost, kind of get them there a lot of the times is really just through consumer and customer education, right? Learning about what it is, essentially changing the, the associations, the things that when you hear the word ketamine, a couple of years back, the first things people's minds would go to is, a horse tranquilizer, or, like just whatever it was, right? Those are just the first things. And, now when people hear it, just much more commonly, people are like, oh, like that healed like my mom or my brother or like a cousin, or like that, changed my life, or, just it's a different association to things. And that's basically just from knowledge and understanding and education about it. I would say that there definitely are, and this is something that is it's screened for when you're first going through and meeting with the clinician. They're asking you, they're essentially getting, it's like when you go to a doctor, for like a checkup or something, they have you fill out all of that intake paperwork, answering, a bunch of questions, giving a bit of like a medical history. It's like, establishing care with somebody. That's basically what you fill out, a bunch of paperwork in advance. We're looking at that, screening through it. And if you've answered the questions of like, if you have any kind of a history of, like schizophrenia or, psychosis, or in certain cases, extreme versions of, like bipolar, like just certain kinds of mental disorders, those definitely are things that are contraindications that ketamine absolutely could kind of put somebody over the edge for. So it's something that, we will never prescribe. Like the clinicians, first, we're going through that first layer, going through the paperwork. Then when they meet with the clinician, it's kind of like a second round of ensuring that there is none of that kind of history. And if there is, then, making sure or clearing it with whoever their, psychiatric professional is, and just ensuring the safety, because we're never going to do anything that is going to, like, our goal here is to heal, not harm. And we're never going to do anything that could potentially put somebody in a situation of harm. And so we screen for that, but it's really more of, any kind of those sort of, psychiatric, mental disorders, things like that. Those are the ones that are a little bit more like, if there is any real room for concern of it kind of, like flipping a switch and then, kind of not being able to, get back to that stability. It's more of those things. I would say in general, if it's, just somebody normal that doesn't have a history of, any kind of, mental disorder in that sense, then it really just is more of a matter of that kind of getting back to that idea of control, right? The idea of losing control and not knowing what's going on, especially, in a sort of psychedelic experience, that is terrifying, because you're like, oh my gosh, like what's going to happen? What's going to come up? I've worked so hard to, keep my demons at bay, or, like just like avoided this because I'm afraid of what's going to happen. It's most of it really is just, it's fear, right? It's fear of, the loss of control, or fear of what's going to happen. Like it's, people, like I said, it's, you work so hard to have this armor, put on this mask that protects you essentially from any kind of external threat. And, the not knowing essentially that, or maybe even knowing that sometimes the biggest threat is actually inside of the armor. It's in our minds. And, that can be a hard concept, I think, for a lot of people to kind of, to swallow, is that, oh, like, wow, like I could put up all of this armor as much as I want, but like my mind, it's, like I'm still constantly battling that. And there's only so much I can do. So it's, it's up to each individual person, I think. Some people, as much as we would want them to try it or think that it would help them, we can't push them. That's going to do the opposite effect, right? And so just making sure that, if somebody is interested, or if they're curious, then, give them some more information. But it's, not trying to push or pressure people into doing it, because if you do that and they end up trying it, going into it, like when you were saying earlier, the set and setting, it's not only just the physical set and setting that you're in, it's the mindset you're in going into it. And if you're going into this feeling closed off and like, this isn't going to work, this is going to be XYZ, just like with any kind of experience in life, the expectations or preconceived notions that or you go into any kind of experience with is more likely than not going to be the outcome, right? If you go into a show and you're like, this is going to suck, like I hate these people,
Mhm.
like I'm not going to have a good time, more oftentimes than not, that's probably going to
You'll
be how
find
that
ways to make
experience.
that true, just to
Exactly.
reassure yourself. So,
Exactly. You're looking for any little pieces of proof, so to speak, to kind of validate your claim of, I told you this wasn't going to work. And then, kind of just going
mhm.
even so much further the other way. So it's, of
Yeah.
course, we wish everybody in the world could try at least one ketamine therapy session. I think the world would be a much different place, but you have to let everybody come to it themselves. And I think that's a huge
Right.
part of it.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, you guys do screen for it. I remember the initial. You guys have you have someone have a conversation with us, and you go over like I think there was like a questionnaire and stuff like that. So I feel like you guys do a good job at that. So that's all established before this, and this is like maybe if you don't know if you fall into this ballpark. I mean, it's worth a conversation. Like maybe you
Yeah.
could have a conversation with somebody from Better You, and they'll give you more reassurance, or they'll tell you like maybe this isn't for you at this time, or whatever it is, but it's certainly worth the conversation. I will also reiterate, you guys cover all this, like, so all this, I feel like so far what we've talked about, maybe it seems like a lot, like it's like, oh, how am I going to remember all this and whatever. I mean, this is all covered, like this is all part of it's all on like the portal. They cover this. You have conversations with people from Better You. This is like you don't have to remember literally any of this. This is just like good information, but it's all covered again. And every single session has like a step by step. It's like you click on the thing. This is your first session. Here's your focus, and you just, I mean, read it, and it tells you exactly what to do, exactly what to think, exactly how to prepare yourself. I mean, I just want to reiterate, you don't have to remember. This seems like probably a lot for people who are maybe wondering about ketamine therapy, but you guys do a great job of covering all these bases, not giving too much information, like providing all the right, ins and out for all of this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So I did want to, you'll notice my air conditioner turn on now is even more loud. It's probably just distracting to me, but the sides of you mentioned like our story, things that happen to us, they end up in retrospect, we can kind of see how they lead us, they kind of lead us to our version of the water to drink from in the end. That's been a lot of thing on this podcast for me personally. I wouldn't have this huge mental health focus and like have these sorts of conversations if I didn't have the history that I had. I had like what I would say a turbulent childhood. I had like some tough teenage years. And having to heal all of those things and having to like learn about all this stuff on the other side. Now I'm in a position where I can speak about these things freely. I can, heal myself and talk about it and help other people. I'm able to offer this space that if I hadn't gone through those things, I don't think that would have that opportunity. And this is like for your personal story, Megan, this is, I would love to get into that because, you are in this position where when that thing happened to you, you probably never saw yourself here, being like a therapist for ketamine, so, let's explore. So like, how did you, like, why would you need ketamine therapy? What happened in your life to lead you down to where you are?
Absolutely. And sort of like I told you yesterday, it's hold on to your seats because it's definitely very out there. It's the last possible thing you'll probably ever, guess, just, by looking at me or, hearing me talk. It's you're like, wait, hold on, what? Like, I need to hear that one more time. So I'll try to, kind of go through from like the beginning of sort of what happened and a little bit of just kind of the journey of then what eventually essentially kind of led me to, kind of my like real rock bottom. And then when I found ketamine and kind of like how it's all sort of come full circle for me. So basically, yeah, go for it. Your thing.
Sorry, I paused you. Go ahead,
You're good.
carry on.
No, and we're back. Perfect time to pause. So basically, when I was 19 years old, so when I was 15 years old, actually, I got discovered to be a model, and I started getting more and more into it. It was getting more and more serious. I committed to a bunch of colleges, was going to go, to Boulder in Colorado, ended up deferring a year and was traveling the world internationally, traveling all over different countries, and then came back home to Southern California in Orange County, which is where I was born and raised, but was in LA for, a few months, just kind of trying to regroup and, getting ready to then go back and start, traveling much more. And so at that point, it was, over a year from when I had initially deferred. And I ended up deciding that, since this modeling was really taking off, that this was going to be my path. This was going to be what I was going to do. And so decided to not go to college. And probably within a couple months of making that decision, and like I said, was, kind of laying the groundwork for, then going back out and traveling to a whole bunch more places. And like I said, the modeling, it was really taking off. It was like in New York Fashion Week, Paris, like London, Barcelona, Australia, just all over the place. And so basically when I was in LA, I was at a nightclub, and I hate nightclubs. They're not fun. You can't talk to people. I don't really enjoy them, but it was one of my good friends at the time. It was their birthday, and they're like, "Hey, you have to come. Like, you have to celebrate me." And I'm like, "Okay, fine." So I went with them, and basically, long story short, I got shot in that nightclub. There was I'm not going to mention his name, but there's a very not so good like gangster that just happened to be there because another person was performing, and it was just the venue that night was absolutely insane, and they were trying to essentially assassinate this person. I had no idea who he was before this, but apparently he was standing right behind me. I mean, I didn't know who he was. I wouldn't have recognized nothing. I didn't even know he was standing behind me. So it was basically they were trying to assassinate him and shoot him, and I ended up taking a bullet. And of course, when it happened, I thought they were fireworks going off. Like, I was so naive. I've never heard a gunshot before. Like, and I was just like, wait, what? But the chaos and, just the panic, the adrenaline started coursing through my body. And so I actually I felt some kind of an initial burning sensation, but I didn't necessarily even realize that I had been shot until, believe it or not, I was in the ambulance. So I somehow managed to get within a few minutes from when the gunshots rang out, from inside to the outside. I got across the street and then like on the other side of the street pretty much. And it wasn't until then when my friend who got me out was like, "You have a little like circle of blood on your shorts." And I'm like, "What?" Like, fine. I probably just banged into something. He's like, "Oh, let's just go get you checked out." So walked me over to one of the cop cars. They had all of these shotguns pointing at it of like the entrance to the club. Everybody's having to come out with their hands out. Somehow I avoided all of that. I got out immediately and was waiting for an ambulance by the cop car. And it wasn't until I was in that ambulance that they told me, they're like, "Oh, we have an abrasion on the front left hip." And I'm like, "What does that mean?" I don't know what that means, right? And I'm like, "Does that mean like I've been shot?" And they didn't say yes and they didn't say no. So of course that panic naturally starts to, kind of roll in a bit. Basically, it looked like there was a little kind of like thing poking out of the skin on my front left hip. And so basically, like, they took the shorts off. They're trying to like look at it and see what's going on, putting me on an IV. And at that point, that was when it kind of started sinking in. They're like, "Oh my God, like I have been shot." Like, what, like just trying to process that information was, naturally kind of just like, I don't even know what to do with that. Just complete shock still. But that's really when the pain started coming in. So anyways, long story short, the bullet, it traveled about 8 inches through my body. It entered about right above my left hip, and it was very narrow. So it like was kind of going like this all the way through my body, and it missed every single important organ. It missed my kidneys, reproductive system, any like my spine. I mean, I'm talking millimeters. If I had been sitting any different kind of direction, I would either be paralyzed, quadriplegic, or dead. And I honestly shouldn't be here today. I shouldn't have any kind of quality of life. But the way in which that it went through me, every single person in the emergency room was like, you had somebody looking out over you. So it wasn't until like about a month after this all happened, I was just dealing with the physical sensations of everything. But my mind, it was just too much for my brain to be able to process. And so mentally, it was like, nothing had happened. And it wasn't until about a month after I went on this show where they made this like visual recreation of how the bullet went through me and how close it was. They did this based on all of the scans and the imaging they did in the emergency room that night. And it wasn't until I saw that my mind was like, oh my gosh, like that is me. Like I was this close. Like, I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be alive. I shouldn't be able to even, walk, let alone function. And, so of course, when I saw that, that's really when the downward spiral began. And unfortunately, I was seeing a psychiatrist at that time that put me on like 12 different kinds of medications, all counteracting the side effects from one another. So there's probably like 8 to 9 months of time, like within about a month or so after getting shot, that like I just don't really remember because I was on so many different kinds of medications. And then, of course, dealing with all of that, the modeling, I was in certain ways, honestly, just kind of out of my mind a little bit, right? Like I just didn't know what was up, what was down. I couldn't make sense of anything. I didn't know what to do. It just kind of stopped me in my tracks. And so I ended up having to decide about a year after that, okay, like I was gonna, stop, give up modeling just because I couldn't, get myself together. And so I then threw myself into a completely different industry, like a full 180, and then kind of was just distracting myself, like throwing myself completely in that for the next like 4 or 5 years or so. And, it was sort of the thing where it gave me that purpose back of something, to do, to work towards. But then after about, like I said, 4 or 5 years, that kind of started, had a not so great ending. At the same time, had a real, like my first real relationship kind of ending very poorly. And then my idea was essentially that, okay, like I'm going to let the rest of, 2019 kind of just going to, try to figure out what's next. And then very beginning of 2020, I am going to dive right in and I'm going to figure out what's next. Then, of course, we get COVID and the world shuts down. And so that kind of throws a wrench in everything. So then now I end up moving back with my parents to Orange County. So at first it was like I lost my like professional purpose, then like the romantic, then my last kind of sense of freedom since when I had initially moved away from home. So at that point, that's really when I hit my real rock bottom. And I was there for a pretty good amount of time where I was just not really doing anything, talking to anybody, kind of just watching TV by myself. I was like asleep for most of the day, awake for most of the night, just kind of like was really just not in a good space. And I was like that for I'd say like, I don't know, maybe 6 months, 7 months, 8 almost. And then kind of started coming out of it just a little bit. I had started seeing a therapist and that kind of seemed to help. And all of a sudden I kind of had this little like realization that like, okay, like I need to, take responsibility for, my life, or like this, like, it's up to me. I can't keep blaming things, but I was still, definitely struggling. So then that's kind of the point of where I then found ketamine therapy. And I'm not kidding you, within probably like I said, it definitely took me a few months in the beginning to really kind of, consistently doing the twice a week program, really breaking up all of the damaged pathways in my brains and like unlearning and undoing all of the things that, all of these different, the original source of the trauma. Like once I hit that rock bottom, it's like everything that I had been kind of avoiding all just came crashing back down on me, on top of all of the other things that had kind of since occurred just in me trying to run away from that initial trauma, distracting myself to these other things. So when it all came crashing down, it was like that was real rock bottom. And I definitely had to kind of get to this like little bit of a certain level of like, okay, like I am going to choose to get help. Like I can't keep living like this. So it was once I made that decision that I then, started talk therapy, but then found ketamine therapy about, I'd say maybe like 2 months or so after I started seeing that therapist, when I had that, okay, I need, like, I'm choosing me. I'm choosing to, get help, and I don't want to be stuck in this any longer. I can't live like this. And that was a really scary time because I have never in my entire life ever considered harming myself, hurting myself. But I got to the point in my life, like I'm just too much of a chicken. Like that would never happen. I just couldn't even conceive it. But I got to a point in myself where I was so sad and in so much internal turmoil that I could understand the level of pain and sadness that people get to the point where they are thinking about suicide, like thinking that this is my only way forward. And so that is really honestly what scared me into like, okay, I need to do something. Like this is, that's a slippery slope down. So basically within a couple of months of starting ketamine therapy, as well, and the same combination of doing the talk therapy, all of a sudden I mean, don't get me wrong, it definitely still took me a lot of, work and, kind of just things having to process, but it was insane the amount of progress I started making, and just in the amount of time that I had started it, right? Like it took, like I said, those few months to kind of really get to that full neurobiological reset. But once I was able to get there, all of a sudden it was like when things would happen or come up that normally would have, set me down, a spiral that I, would then get lost in for a little while. Instead, it was now like when things would happen, I was able to kind of deal with it and process it, knowing that I'm going to be okay. And in all of this whole journey, I really kind of came to realize that, and I would say this to myself, every day, even though I did not believe it for a while, until the point of, after a few months started to believe it. And that is that I'm stronger than I think I am. I can handle more than I thought I could. And I got this. It's going to be okay. It'll all work itself out. And also, it's okay to not be okay. In fact, we actually have to not be okay sometimes so that we can be okay and appreciate those times. And just kind of allowing myself to, similar to you, feeling and experiencing, letting this pain in, no matter how much I didn't want to deal with it. As soon as I let it in, then it couldn't control me anymore. It didn't have that same power that I was running from. And then of course, when starting Better You, that was really when I was able to start with the ketamine, and have been building this company every single day since. And of course my roles have changed as we've been, like I said earlier, building and growing more and more. But now to the point of kind of like what I was mentioning, what I do today is I'm working with patients, I'm talking with them when they are at that rock bottom place in themselves, when they're first coming to this treatment, for whatever the reason is, whatever their experiences, whatever they've gone through, whatever pain, trauma. Everybody has a different and unique experience. And what I'm able to do now, and this is kind of how it's come full circle for me, is that I'm able to, I will never pretend I know exactly what it is that you're going through, what your experience is. It's always going to be unique and individual to yourself. But what I do know is that the ways in which us as human beings react and respond and try to deal with and process, pain and trauma and suffering, there's a lot of overlap in the ways in which that we can feel, and that, things that we're trying to do. And that's really where I'm able to, I would say, like, find my way in to connect to people and letting them know and feel that you're not alone in what you're going through. It's not going to be, of course, I'm not going to understand exactly what you have gone through, but the pain, the coping mechanisms, the ways in which you're trying to, like just function, there's a lot of overlap there. And that's really where I can reach people and help them. And kind of just tapping into my own personal experiences of what I have gone through, remembering what I felt like and what I did all the way along and through my journey, all of my trials and errors, trying this, it didn't work, or, just all of the different things over, basically the past, I'd say, 9 years. I've been, learning every step of the way, and I'm never going to not be learning, right? This mental health is a journey, not a destination. And it's something that I think that a lot of us don't tend to remember as often. We're like, I just want to, get here and then I'll be good. It's like, no, no, no. Like we're constantly, we're fluid creatures. We're constantly changing and evolving, always trying to be a better version of who we were yesterday. And it's reminding people a lot of the times that, it's so easy to be so hard on ourselves. Like, why can't I just get it together? Like, why can't I just be this? Or why am I always doing this to myself? And it's important to remember that, the only way out is through, and you have to be patient with yourself, give yourself that grace. And, knowing that, like I said, it's okay to not be okay. But I feel like I do a pretty good job with it. But the biggest thing for people when they are, coming to Better You, when they're coming to ketamine therapy, is a lot of people, they're like, this is my last chance, like this is my Hail Mary, like if this doesn't work, like I'm out of options. And those people are the ones that are like, I need this to work like overnight, right? And those are typically the people that it takes a bit longer for. And so when they're coming to me and they're like, it's not working, like, and they're kind of freaking out a little bit, I'm like, it's okay. Just, remember, you got to take it day at a time, session at a time. Try not to be so hard on yourself. Just take it step at a time. But as long as I can give them that little glimmer of hope, like to see that light at the end of the tunnel, essentially reaching my hand out and pulling them up just that tiny little bit so that they can actually then see that horizon, that's the difference maker, is when people know that, like, oh, like it is a bit far away, but I can see it. It is possible. And that's the difference maker, from at least what I have seen in working with the, hundreds of patients that I have gotten to work with over the past couple of years. And it's been truly it's been a journey, I won't lie to you, but getting to kind of now see full circle that, I never would have wished, of course, to have, been shot at, such a young age, and, just such a pivotal moment of my life. But, now kind of coming full circle, seeing that now I can take this, awful thing that happened to me and use it for good, to help others along the way, so that, not like, it wasn't for nothing. Essentially, it's my purpose, and I know that I'm meant to be doing this. So like I said, it took me many, many years to kind of get that reason, or like why the modeling didn't work out, or why that other career didn't work out. It's because if those things had, I would not be here now doing what I'm doing. And this is what I'm meant to do. And what I'm, this is it's honestly the greatest and most fulfilling thing. And I'm just so grateful to be here to help you guys and let you know you're not alone, and it is going to be okay.
Yeah, yeah, it's so profound. I mean, thank you again for just being willing to share all that stuff. Like it's got to be, with time, I'm sure you've learned how to speak about it in a way that doesn't like feel weird or feel. I feel like a lot of times when we talk about this stuff, we talk about these things that happen to us. To me, when I would share them, I'm like, am I lying about this? Did that really happen? Like you'd have to like allow it. But it's just like, yeah, it really is like, it's so important. What you said about being able to help other people. It really creates those little, it's like this sheet of thing, and there's like these little holes that you get to, like, okay, I see you in there because I've made that hole on the way out so I can see you. And like you said, I love your analogies and metaphors of being able to like reach in and actually access these people. And it helps us, again, with all of this stuff. We continuously think that we're alone. We think that we're the worst. We can't get over this thing that happened. It was the worst thing that happened. Nobody can understand. But just by you sharing those sorts of things, and it really does create an opening, and it allows us to allow those things that happened with ourselves. Something that I, really a lot of my work, and like my, I mean, almost obsession, like something I think about a lot because it was so profound to me, is like the self, personality, identity. I mean, these are really at like the core of how do I get better, or why am I thinking this way, or what's going on with me, or this pain that happened. A lot of it all seems to point back to like the self identity, the personality structure that we unknowingly formed to get through these things. Have you thought of, I mean, where do you think about this, like this before and after of kind of like allowing our old self to go? You know, you had to like really let go of like, I guess I'm not going to be a model. You know, you know, those are things we have to mourn in themselves, like whether, you know, and then there's this in between period of like, you know, I've heard it said like the or the chapter between stories, or the story between stories. You're like, I know that I'm going in the right direction. I know that those things don't serve me any longer, but I haven't like made this new identity. I think I'm leaning towards my purpose, whatever the heck that means. You know, you're in between. And I think there's a way that we have to, you know, mourn and allow through all of these processes, you know, and a lot of it isn't until retrospect that we could really allow the mourning to take place and like allow that thing to be let go to you know, let something new in. I was talking with I made a little post last week about talking to you on here, and I just like seeing if anybody has any questions or inquiries. I had one friend who was talking about, you know, she was in, I think like her late third or late 20s, and she got diagnosed with cancer, and she had like this like really good job before, and she had her whole life set up, like everything was cool. She got diagnosed with cancer, had to go through all this time off work, go through all that turmoil for a long time, and then, you know, she was good on the other side. They got rid of the cancer, but she tried going back to that job, she tried going back to that old life, and she was like, I don't none of this makes sense to me. Like she had this, you know, awakening of a new version of herself, which I think, you know, being forced to face our own mortality in a lot of ways is a huge thing in our culture that is, you know, massively overlooked. And it really is, you know, a lot of our old self has to die off in a sense. And so she kind of inquired about, you know, if ketamine therapy could help with those sorts of things, like being able to let an old structure of ourself die off, being able to like really adapt to and allow to this new side of ourselves, and how to trust that. So, I love that you shared your story about, you know, ketamine allowing this new version of who you are to take place. You know, what do you think about the self identity, personality structure, you know, in I guess the death and rebirth of these sorts of things, and like how does psychedelic therapy play a role in that, I guess, too?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And, you know, first, I'm so sorry that, your friend had to go through something as, intense and terrifying as that at such a young age. And, just as like, of course, much different, being diagnosed with cancer versus, getting shot, but, still both things, it's making us aware of our mortality in a sense. And I think that when, especially, being younger and having something like that happen, because you have so much life ahead of you, it's at least for me, it really rattled me to my core. It made me realize that, like, oh, like, I'm not going to live forever. Like, I'm not invincible. Like, I'm just human. And of course, through the, just the years of, just like the pain and the suffering, and just the trying this, trying that, one thing that I realized really, like, when I started the ketamine therapy, was that it's not that you have to essentially let, like, your old self die. It's more that when kind of looking at the person that you used to be, there can still be pieces and aspects of that person that you still like, that you still identify with, that you still feel connected to. And those are the pieces and parts that, at least for me, through ketamine, it was allowing me to be able to see that, like, oh, I don't just have to completely write off, the person that I used to be, the values, the goals, the things that I was working towards. Because, and this was the biggest thing for me, is that having to kind of come to terms with that I am no longer that person. Like, this, what I have gone through, what I have experienced, it has fundamentally changed who I am. And in doing so, it has essentially altered, and changed my, my priorities. And, especially after something of, like a near death experience or, diagnosis or whatever it might be, it really tends to, at least from what I've seen, put a lot of things into perspective of, instead of just, doing whatever kind of, job to, have a career. It's, I've seen a lot of people that will then go into something that is more, like fulfilling, or like that it feeds their soul. At least for me, that's what this is, getting to help others. And of course, sometimes at the end of the day, if, literally being on calls all day, of course I can be, exhausted, but my internal battery doesn't just feel constantly drained. My cup is still full because it's meaningful, it's fulfilling, and it is, for me, it feels like it's my calling. But I had to kind of come to terms with that. Like I was for a long time really trying to just like, that's like, who I used to be, and like I can't be any of the things that, I used to be, or that I, used to want, because that's, like that's just not where I am now, or I'm not doing that anymore. But what I had to kind of come to realize is that it's, I realized that I'm like, like actually, like it reminded me of the pieces and parts of myself that I had just kind of closed off to for such a long time. And I'm like, wait, but like in ketamine, I would come out of some sessions. I'm like, wait, but like I remember like when I used to do that, it used to make me feel so happy, or like I loved it, or like, just whatever it was, no matter how silly or strange or whatever it is. If it was something like a piece or a part of myself that I liked, I realized that it's not all or nothing, that I could take, the pieces that I wanted and let go of the pieces that either, no longer served me, or that just wasn't aligned with this new, essentially just, me that I have been, continuously growing into. And, I've had, it would feel like a lot of different, I don't know, lifetimes, if you could call it, in my, not too many years. I'm almost 30. So it's like I feel like I've lived like 45, 50 years in the almost 30 years I've been here. But it's just I've had, at 30, I've had basically three very big different, career shifts. So it's like, starting over and over and over again. And I won't lie, that was really hard for me, having to start from scratch after just like, oh, like I just did all of this. I put in so much time and energy and work, and like this was my everything. It's all I thought about. I sacrificed so much for this. And then when it doesn't pan out, of course it's, it's heartbreaking, it's shattering, because it's like, oh my gosh, like was that all for nothing? But another thing that ketamine therapy really helped me to also realize is that while those different avenues that, I was doing, while they didn't necessarily pan out in the way that I thought it would, there were still a lot of, skills and things that I learned in those two different, careers, essentially, that I'm able to still tap into and utilize in what I'm doing now. It's not all for a waste. It's just, you can use some of the same sort of like, principles or ideas, or, just, things that you learned of how you worked, that you can bring into whatever it is you're doing, and, kind of just, change it a little bit, restructure it, like, take it apart and be like, okay, when I was trying to, get this done for a deadline, like how would I prioritize like all of the other things I needed to get done, even though it's not the specific thing of like what I'm like actually doing, it's a different job or a career. I can still apply those same kind of, just either prioritization or, organization, or just, thought processes, just whatever it might be. You can still utilize the certain things in like little ways and bring that into, what you're doing next. And so it's kind of like, the reason that, they have us, go through school, and you're constantly, you're going from middle school to then, high school, and then, college. It's sort of like all of those things. It's just kind of like the next step on the path towards, leading you to, of course, then, whatever career it is. Right. And it's sort of like, I kind of tried to think of it in that same sense of like, okay, like, this was like, my steps to kind of get to where I am now. Right. And like a huge part of it is in this job for me, it's medical, right? So, we're talking about very serious things, and, needing to have that level of professionalism. And basically, like what I did after modeling, I went into mortgage real estate, was doing residential loans. So I was dealing with a lot of professionals in a much more serious environment, whereas modeling, it's a lot more fluid creativity and just kind of characters, I would say. So like, but at the same time, in modeling, I'm working with people from all over the world, all different ethnicities, races, and just all of the things, and learning how to kind of find that way to connect with any different kind of person. So that's kind of what I took from the modeling. And then with real estate, kind of taking that much more professional demeanor and being able to handle much more sensitive things, like talking to somebody and going over their finances and like just personal sensitive things, and like kind of also helping people going through that emotional process of real estate and loans. That's a huge part of it as well. But just I took pieces from each thing and now incorporate that into what I do now. And so I'm like, it's not a waste. It wasn't, of course, the plan, but that's okay. And we never want to have to start over again, but it's who knows, maybe the reason that if we can't make sense of it right now, maybe what it was she was doing before, no matter how much she tried or wanted it to, it wasn't meant to be. And who knows, maybe the next most incredible thing is right around the corner, and it's just waiting for you. And because you're not doing this, you're able to jump into that. And that's kind of the way that I try to think about it, and definitely helps, I would say.
Yeah, yeah. I seriously love that you went this way with that. Like so cool, because I think that's so important. Is a lot of times we do feel the need to, like, even hearing my own language, we feel the need to like reject our old self, or like
Yeah.
completely deny it, or there's if we're going through a lot of change and we're forming a new version of our identity, I feel like there's especially I think when it comes in kind of like the mystical, spiritual realm of things, it's really easy to, we have these things called ego death, and then we like reject everything about it. Like, I don't have an ego anymore for a while, or we have like
Yeah.
like just shame about who we were before or whatever. But it's all led you to who you were, and I think that in my own journey, that's been a huge thing for me. As there was a long time where when I first got into meditation and breath work and yoga, I was doing it like every day of the week for multiple hours, and so I almost got like very like cold and dry, and like anything that wasn't spiritual or meditative, I just rejected. I remember for a while, I wouldn't listen to anything that was like funny or like making fun of anything, or comedy of any sorts, when before I loved to laugh. I loved comedy. I liked romantic comedy, stand-up comedy, like I loved laughter. And there was a long time where I rejected anything that wasn't like spiritual or divine or whatever. And then I had to realize that I had some things happen, and I remember like being weirded out at how dry and just serious I was. Like, like someone close to me had passed away, and I was like, just, oh, well, that's the way of life, accepting it. Like, I wouldn't let myself feel these actual human things. And there was it was just like a revamping of allowing those things in, and allowing yourself to be, pieces of who you were. There's a line that I've written: the ego doesn't like change nor grit, but loves to fill with hold. So there's like pieces of your old self that you have to like, you don't destroy them. You don't try to like delete these parts of your life that happen. They happen, and they are who you are today. In a lot of sense, they aren't only who you are today, but you have to allow them. I really like that you mentioned that, because there is a lot of I don't know. A lot of the times there's almost like shame that could sneak in, I think, when we're trying to redevelop our new version of who we are now, and where we're at in life, and in work, and romantic relationships, all of it. Like, we feel the need sometimes, I think, to like not allow any of the old stuff in. And
Yeah.
I don't think that that's as healthy as it could be. Like now, I mean, I love comedy. I listen to comedy podcasts all the time. Every Monday at 8 p.m. is like my favorite time of the whole week, because it's a new podcast comes out that I love. It's a comedy podcast. So yeah, I really like where you went with that. I thank you for that. Like, it is forming these new versions of ourselves doesn't mean we need to reject everything about the past. There's a lot of good, juicy stuff that we've learned through our lifetime that we don't need to just throw overboard. I think that's good.
Think about it like this, right? Like when you get a computer, when you first get it, it's running properly, it's running efficiently, there's not too much excess software on there, it's doing pretty good, right? And then all of a sudden, as you have it for a bit longer, you're like, oh, like I need to do this or that. And so you start adding some new software, or downloading files, or like whatever it is, adding new things to the computer. And sometimes while we are adding a program or a new software, there is a reason for that. There's a purpose. It's designed to like either help or do XYZ. But sometimes what we don't really realize or know is that sometimes some of these programs or the software can have little bugs or viruses that we can't see when we're downloading it. We only then realize it once we're then starting to try to do something else. And now all of a sudden the computer is, it's that same analogy from before, it's slowing down, it's overheating, it's not working as properly, you're getting the endless rainbow wheel that never ends, and you're like, oh my gosh, why is this happening, right? And so what you do is you when that happens, you don't just throw the computer away. It's still a good piece of machinery. The computer itself is not broken, it's just the files, the software, the programs on it have just introduced these viruses and these bugs that is then messing with the whole functioning of the computer. So like I said, you don't throw the computer away. You just wipe you get rid of the bad, you clear out the viruses or the bugs, or you update the software essentially, right? So it's sort of like Apple, if you have an iPhone, you get new updates every couple of months, right? It's learning from the bugs and the viruses from the previous versions of the software. That's how it continues to improve and work better and better and better. So it's the same kind of idea with ourselves, of who we are as human beings, as we grow, as we learn, as we evolve. It's such an easy thing to, when you're making a radical shift and going through a humongous change or a trauma, that we feel that we have to completely, like you said, get rid of all of the old so that we can, essentially kind of jump into this new and be this thing, because that's the only way we feel that we can survive. But it's really that, it's human beings, our greatest superpower is learning from past mistakes and experience, right? It goes back to, like caveman days, right? Like if it's how the brain works. When something happens, and the way like that, whatever happens, we learn from that so that when it happens again, we know what to do and can fall back on that memory or that experience, right? So it's like in the caveman days, if somebody was like, ooh, pretty lion, and then all of a sudden the lion comes and bites your arm off, you're like, okay, maybe don't go up to try and pet the lion again, right? It's our survival instincts. That's our greatest superpower. But it's also, it can be our greatest weakness, right? It's all about making that superpower work for you, not against you. And the way of doing that is by not completely shutting off the past. It's taking the things that didn't necessarily work out, or that was causing problems or causing the computer to overheat, and it's altering it. It's taking those pieces that did work and that were good, and it's getting rid of the parts that were making it slow down or not work well. And so it's just essentially, it's like that consistent software update. And again, like, you're not throwing the computer away. The computer is fine. There was just some bugs and viruses you had to clear out and then update. So then now all of a sudden it's working perfectly again, right? It's essentially the same thing as what I was talking about before, of going into these sessions of clearing out your mind, just getting everything outside of yourself so it can live outside of you. And it's kind of like that same idea of, like, there's only so much memory or hard drive space on a computer. If you have too much on there, it's not going to be able, it's going to be super slow, it's going to be constantly overworked and overheated. So you got to get it out of the computer, like whether it's deleting old files or downloading things onto a thumb drive, like putting it into the cloud, whatever analogy you want to put there. It's getting it off of the hard drive, clearing that space so that it could be able to work properly. And it's one of the first analogies, believe it or not, that I kind of came up with after first starting with ketamine therapy. And I've really found that in a lot of the different ways when I was trying to like articulate and understand what it was that I was experiencing, the changes that started happening inside of me, and just like, the way that I was thinking, the way I was approaching certain things, and like how I was actually growing, the way that my mind makes sense of things is through analogies. And that was kind of really how not only I was able to kind of understand more like what was going on inside of myself, but I then also found that that was a really great way for me to be able to, like I was talking about earlier, reach and connect with those people, explaining these kind of harder to understand concepts and ideas and putting it into very simple language that anybody could understand. And it was the way my mind kind of started making sense of things and putting the, puzzle pieces back together. And I find that if you can, in your own ways, as you're experiencing things and going through things, the more that you write, it's the greatest tool that you can use in terms of understanding what it is that you're going through and experiencing. And it's actually, this is a quote I got from an Apple TV show, Physical. It's a hilarious show, but there was this great quote in it. And it was that when you write things down, you can't forget. And if you can't forget, or no, you write things down. What was it? It was like, you write things down so you can't forget. And if you can't forget, then you'll remember. And so it's the kind of thing where when we're going through our own journeys, typically we can kind of tend to overlook the little wins, the little progresses that we're making, or those little changes that we might not pay too much attention to unless given attention to it. But then all of a sudden we can really start to see our progress. And if we ever have, setbacks, being able to come back and reread these previous journal entries of our journey and going like, okay, like, yeah, this is a bit of a setback, but like, look at how far I've come from when I started. Like, I didn't remember or realize, like how where this was when I started, right? Or actually how far I've really come. And it's a great way to remind yourself, giving yourself like that credit of that, you are changing, you are evolving. It's gonna take some time, but in the end, it's worth it. And it's, most people don't like journaling. They're like, it's a chore. I have to do it. I'm not gonna do that. But I'm telling you, it really is the greatest tool that helped me along my journey and getting to where I was and just making sense of everything. So
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, man. It really is like it's a superpower. A lot of times I like to say that I have a lot going on and sometimes it's bouncing around inside my skull. And I
yeah,
think that I'm going to solve problems by just looping the same like craziness
gotta
that's
get
in
it
my
out.
skull. Yeah,
Gotta get
getting
it
it
out.
out, like you mentioned too, like even just pulling up a voice recorder and just speaking. Maybe you're not even going to show anybody. Maybe you're not even wanting to listen to it ever again, but just
Mhm.
speaking it out and talking about it, talk it into your phone or write it out. A lot of times once you get started with writing, the initial sitting down, like what am I going to write about? And I think we're also kind of trained in the Western world to be graded on everything. Like we're writing as if someone else is going to read it or as if we can write it wrong. There's no writing it wrong when we're just sharing our thoughts, getting them on paper so we can actually think through them. I think Jordan Peterson a lot of times has some way of saying like we don't know we don't know what we're thinking until we think it, and a lot of times we think that we have this like string of mess in there sometimes and we think that that's okay, well I did my best, but a lot of times when you write it out you can see, oh, this is a mess, I can think about this a little bit differently. So yeah, I love all of your analogies and metaphors and everything. They're so perfect. There's like, I'm just saying yes. I love it's also funny how we're able to understand, computers and ourself. Like it really is a way of kind of laying out the inner workings of
One
our
of my
being.
better ones, that's for sure. I will say it
Yeah,
hit it on the head. So like I've said that to people, they're like, that's a great way of phrasing it. Like now
it
that
really
I
is.
think of it this way, I'm like, it makes me see it in a whole new light. And I'm like, that's the idea, right? Like it just
Yeah.
dawned on me at one point. I'm like, oh my gosh, like it's actually so much simpler to like it gives me like a roadmap of like, okay, like rather than trying to make sense of everything of like, how do I fix this or what do I do? It's like, okay, think of it in a very simple analogy. How do you fix a computer? You debug it, you delete some extra files you don't need anymore, and you clear out the space, you get it working again. It's like, okay, like that gives me an idea. Like, how do I now apply that to myself? What's the excess stuff that I'm thinking about, that I'm feeling? Get it out of me, download it off that hard drive. What are the habits? What are the daily routines that I do? What's serving me? What's not serving me? What's helping me? What's getting me closer, making me feel more aligned to myself, right? And it's like those are the programs, that's the software, right? Our habits, our routines, that's how we go through life, right? It's like that consistency. And so it's just like finding those analogies that you align with, that makes sense to you of kind of what you're experiencing, and then kind of use that almost as like your like roadmap or navigation for however you fix or you solve that equation, and apply that to the situation that you're dealing with. And I find that really makes it a lot easier than like a lot of the self-help books out there that's like, okay, you got to map out this, then you got to figure this out, and you're just like, oh my gosh, this is
Hmm.
so much, like I don't know where to begin, like it's too overwhelming, and you almost just don't even want to start. So it's like, just start small, piece by piece, and it'll get more and more and more. And that's really just, it's, you start by starting. That's really the biggest thing, is you just got to start somewhere.
Step one, take step one.
Yeah, one day
Um,
or day one, right?
Hey, there you go. Okay, we are getting up here in time. I want to. I have pretty much just one more question, and then I would love for you to just give us one more summary of Better You, where we can go, like how people get started with it, what the next step is after, like maybe this podcast is the first time they've heard anything about even psychedelics, like let's say from that point. So like where do we go? But before we get into that, I did have a question about the future of like psychedelic therapy, the future of like job wise. I had one friend who I'm like, I'm listening loud and clear too. I'm interested even for myself. Like if we're seeing maybe in the future, as this world opens up and it's like really actually helping people, normally we have the routes of, you go to school and you become a psychologist, or even like a school counselor, or whatever it is, how you can help people. I think there's a lot of people who listen to the podcast who are kind of like, we know that we want to help people, and we're not really sure how. And I think that like for me personally, like this stuff is super enticing. Like if I could help people out, and help people go through ketamine therapy. So the future of like work in the psychedelic field, like not only just for Better You, but like I don't know, I guess where do you see like 15-20 years down the road, like what's this going to look like? How could someone who's listening, who has interest, like prepare themselves or lean into it, or who do we reach out to, any of that stuff? And then if you'll just make sure we know exactly where to go for Better You, to further ourselves with Better You.
Absolutely. Great question. So, a lot of exciting things in the pipeline in terms of the world of psychedelics. So, currently at the moment, the only legal psychedelic is ketamine. And ketamine, actually, it's technically not even necessarily really a psychedelic. It's actually technically classified as a dissociative anesthetic. But when given at sub anesthetic level doses, that's really where you can get the psychedelic experience. Because like traditionally, ketamine was synthesized to be an anesthetic for like for surgery, or it was used on like the battlefield, and so it wasn't really actually until they people were coming out of surgeries and they started having these crazy mental health benefits, that's when they really started looking into it for the mental health side of things. So that's basically the only reason excuse me, why ketamine really is the only legal psychedelic, because technically it's actually not really a psychedelic for what it was intended purpose was when originally synthesized. Um, so that's essentially kind of the world of ketamine. In terms of other psychedelics, I don't know the exact timeline on all of them, because they're always kind of changing. There's a lot of clinical trials and things that has to kind of take place, and that they all have to go through before they can be cleared and federally approved. But like for example, They've been doing a ton of clinical trials with MDMA for PTSD. They've been working a lot with veterans, like, with MAPS. They've been, researching this and, doing all kinds of things for almost, I think, like the past 50 years, right? Like Rick Doblin has led the way for this. And, they're almost there. I think they're in like the stage 3 of clinical trials. Like they're probably within maybe the next, I don't know, a couple of years or so that can be approved for PTSD, and then as well as there's LSD for Alzheimer's. We're seeing amazing results in that regard. Again, all things clinical trials, they're still illegal, but they are, of course, for clinical studies and trials and things like that. That's kind of where they're gathering that data. There's a lot of hoops that kind of have to be jumped through before anything can kind of come out. So, I mean, that's probably, maybe 5 years or so out, give or take. I don't know the exact timeline. Again, that's also very fluid, constantly changing. It just kind of depends. I don't know. I know like psilocybin has been decriminalized in a couple of states. I think like Oregon and somewhere else. Can't remember exactly, but it doesn't mean that it's still technically like illegal, right? Like you can't be, like selling it or doing anything like that. It's just been decriminalized. But so that, I don't remember the exact timeline on that, but probably within the next, like, I don't know, couple of years to maybe like 6, 7, 8 years or so, a lot of these different kind of psychedelics that, have been around for a very long time, as soon as they've, made their way through all of the clinical trials and the studies and they've gathered the data, basically what we think is probably gonna, like how it's gonna roll out is that all of these things, you have to do in clinic, in office, essentially, for any kind of these experiences, which is still, even once these other compounds are available or, are legal, essentially, for treatment, basically, it's still, you have to go in office. And that's what makes ketamine such a game changer, is being able to do this from the comfort of your own home. It's normally in mental health, we don't see numbers of success rates above like 30%, if like on the best day, like absolute best, somewhere around 30%. That's typically like the success rate with typical mental health, medications, treatment, whatever it is. The numbers that we have been seeing from this at-home model is, I mean, we're probably somewhere of like 80 to, mid 90 success rate, which is insane to even think about, right? It's like, oh my gosh, like this works, right? And people are able to, especially if they're in, like a rural area or something, and they're able to get access to, utilize this treatment, right? It's shipped to the home. Now, of course, a lot of the reasons of why we've been able to do this has been because of, COVID and telemedicine laws changing. And so that's kind of how we've been able to do a lot of this. Now, that being said, the laws are still probably potentially going to be, changing a little bit, probably maybe by the end of this year. They could extend it again. We don't know until we get that guidance. But essentially, from what I understand, the only change that's going to happen is that you'll have to go in and like meet with the clinician for your initial appointment versus being able to do that through telemedicine as we currently have been. But then after that, same thing, the medicine, everything will be getting shipped to the home and can utilize the treatment from the comfort of your own home. So in terms of like psychedelics, that's kind of like the idea of timing of that, these things are in the pipeline, they are in the works, they've been, getting studied, trials for a long time. We're still, of course, a little ways out, but basically it's, once the FDA approves these things, then they will give guidance as to like how and who can be able to start, administering and, making this accessible. So essentially, like in terms of the workforce, like right now, this is a brand new industry, right? We're essentially forging the path of a brand new, industry that, as it's just, everything is new, right? We don't have a like a playbook of, okay, like, if you're trying to, like open a bank or, open a real estate office, like you do, XYZ, and then that's how this is the game plan here. But this, we're figuring it out as we go, right? We're trying to be very conscious of not doing, anything that is going to, harm, but we're really trying to change the standard of care and mental health, and changing the stigmas that are associated with mental health. And like I've said a few times in this podcast now, it's okay to not be okay. And just getting rid of all of the negative associations that mental health has had for such a long time, primarily just because most of the mental health things for the past 50 years, they haven't really worked that well, right? It's led people to, chronic dependence on medications, and, suicide, and depression, and just not being able to actually heal. And the biggest difference with psychedelics is that these things have the power to actually heal and allow you to free yourself from the pain and the suffering, that had been plaguing you for how, like, most of your life, or however long it was. And knowing that it's possible, that honestly is the biggest difference. But in terms of like the workforce, we're trying to be, especially just with Better You, we're being very mindful of not opening too quickly. We're not just, we could have very easily, like a lot of our competitors out there, they went and they raised a lot of money initially, and they opened up in all these places. But it's, we could have easily done that, but instead we're like, we want to go slow, figure out the best way of what patients actually realistically need to maximize, the results and get the most out of this. And we realized that it's the level of care and attention. It's being able, if you need help, being able to call somebody, text somebody, get a hold of somebody on the phone, have a video call, have support along the way, guidance, information, and just having everything you need. And in order to do that, it requires a lot of different aspects. And so that's kind of, a couple of different things. It could be you want to do something that is helping people, but maybe you're not the best at, talking to people or whatever it is, but you're really good at, systems and softwares. There could be the avenue of, being on, like the care coordination teams, or like, the support, like handling, the operations of things, the people that actually keep these, make this company go, full circle and keep it running. So there's opportunities in that kind of an aspect, as well as, let's just say, you're like, I'm not that good at systems, but like, I really know how to talk to people. I have, my own experiences that I've gone through, and, like, I've learned a lot. I have a lot of wisdom, whatever it is. That could be the kind of realm of more of, say, something like an integration guide, which is another aspect of our company. Is like, what we do is, after, like, when people first come to us, they have an intro call just to learn more information. That second step then is they meet with the clinician. The clinician determines they are a good candidate for treatment, will prescribe medicine, and then as soon as they receive their box in the mail, you schedule a treatment preparation call with someone from our team. They essentially walk you through how to take the medication, the steps, the process, kind of just everything you need to know, preparing you before you even start with the medicine. Then after you have started with the medicine, you start slow, you work your way up from those acclimation doses. Then after you've completed, it's usually after about every like third or seventh session, like depending on which package you initially signed up for. But typically it's about every like 3 or 4 sessions you do. That's when you would then at that point schedule an appointment with one of our integration guides. And essentially what their role is they, they get on a video call with you, and, they kind of, everything that you have that's kind of come up for you so far, that, you've journaled, that you've experienced, just everything that has been happening for you so far. They really help you to just kind of hold space, and like, you can either, kind of share what's been happening, and then they can kind of give you some helpful tips and tricks to really bring that and incorporate that, and integrate it really into your everyday life, so that you could actually make those lasting changes. Or additionally, they could, they can give you, some more helpful, pieces of advice, or, tips or tricks. It's, up to whatever it is that you want out of that session, essentially. And then additionally, if at any point throughout the whole process, basically, if you need help, if you need to troubleshoot something, you can always, like, this is what I do, right? Is you can get on a video call with myself or anybody else from my team, and we can kind of, just help you with if it's an issue with the medicine, if you aren't sure how like continued care or maintenance works. And so essentially that's kind of the process from when initially getting started as a patient, all the way till once you kind of completed that whole first round, which is it's about a month, is like each round of treatment, whether you're doing either the 4 or the 8 session package. As I mentioned before, you are either doing a session once or twice a week. So depending on that, it varies a little bit, but pretty much like the steps of like how many different appointments and touch points that you get throughout the process, as well as, you're getting check-ins, you have the portal to kind of follow through everything. You've got every single thing laid out for you. So as Jacob said earlier, don't worry, you don't have to remember all the stuff we've covered. It's all very laid out clearly in that portal for you. So basically after that first month, that's typically where people will get on, say another call with me, and they're like, hey, like, like I'm feeling good, but like, how does continued care work? Like, am I done? Do I need to do more? Like, I don't really know how this works or what I'm supposed to be doing. And that's usually where I'll just be able to have a conversation kind of just to assess how you're feeling, where you're at, how much progress you've made. And it's up to you, right? And the other thing too is, let's just say you initially sign up with, the 8 sessions. That doesn't mean you have to always do that. You can always go down to the 4 session. And that's actually kind of part of the idea, is we want to get you to, in the beginning, you kind of start doing it much more frequently. And then kind of as you start moving forward and, getting to that neurobiological reset, then it kind of gets into more of that maintenance. So it's like, okay, I started with twice a week, then once a week, then once every other week, once a month, then all the way almost to as needed. And it's great because, one person might need to do this, another person might need that. And so based on where you're at and how you're doing, we can help you to kind of give you, like a guide map of like, okay, like what are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? Like, how do you feel? Like, asking you questions, kind of just determining like where you are, how much progress you've made. And we're never going to try to, push like, hey, like, you need to do another round, like, or you're not going to get better. It's more that like, hey, like if you're interested, can give you the information, kind of give you just like what we have seen, with previous experience, and then kind of just go from there. But ultimately, it's up to you. And you can always like, you could even stop for a few months and come back to us, right? Like I have patients that they're like, I took a 3-month break, and they come back to us, and it's literally as simple as like just picking which package they want to do, confirming the dosage, and then getting, collecting payment and sending that refill in. So it's a super easy process to pick back up after you've already established that care. In terms of where to go to find out more information, you can go to www.betteru, just the letter U, care.com. And you can also go to our Instagram, which is BetterU, same thing, just the letter U, care, and that's on Instagram. We've got a lot of great content, patient testimonials. We've done a lot of conferences, activations, all kinds of great things that you can check all of that out on the Instagram page. And we're always adding new awesome content and, just great recommendations for things. So in terms of, workforce with Better U, those are the kind of different avenues in that sense, as well as, as the markets and things change, there could be more opportunities also in, becoming, like an integration guide or like a facilitator, right? For some of these experiences, it's until these things kind of come through in the pipeline, we just don't know exactly what it's going to look like yet, but it's something to, if you're interested, can follow. But additionally, if you're interested in, working with, ketamine now, or, in any kind of a different aspect, there's lots of opportunities and lots of different ways to get involved and to contribute. So it's, again, one of the great things is that currently we're doing a lot. It's all very remote, right? So you're able to, help people from, the comfort of your own home until the point of when, of course, we're going to be opening up our first brick and mortar here in Los Angeles, like our first, mental health or like wellness center, basically, where we can be able to be doing, IVs and IMs, and having like little integration pod rooms, and people can come in and meet with the doctor. They can come in and meet with a talk therapist, just like all kinds of things, as well as some fun stuff we've got coming in the pipeline is we're going to be doing some regenerative health, sexual health, couples therapy, all kinds of really, really exciting, us, of course, with talk therapy as well. A lot of exciting things coming in the pipeline. So definitely will be much more opportunity in all of that sense. I know I blurted it all out a little bit out of order, but I had to get all of it out there so I didn't forget anything. So there you go.
No, it's perfect. It's all great information, and I will of course include in the description a couple links, and then I'll probably include whatever like clips or whatever I make. I will include that info there, and yeah, anybody who's listening, if you have my info, feel free to message me if you have any questions about my personal experience, or like if for whatever reason you're confused about anything, like I will do my best to kind of be an usher of sending you on over to Better You. Just to emphasize, I mean, I've had great experience with all these people from over there. It's been really like there's been so much yes from me. Like I'm just like down to the music is just straight gas. I love it. Like the initial, at the beginning, they mentioned breath work. There's meditations that they send you, like all of it. I'm like, oh, this is so cool. I'm so glad that they included this. I didn't think that it was going to be that in detail when I first got into it, and I was just so happy along the whole way. So I feel like you guys do such a good job at Better You of supporting all these aspects, and you're very aware of the future and like how you could continue to improve it too. We had some discussions yesterday about kind of some of the things you guys are looking forward to in the future, and yeah, it's just so much yes from me. I think there's so many great resources, and the future of not only your guys' company but just healing and wellness centers, and just I think we're really starting to look at the term mental health in such a new way. It's been such like a weird, icky, somehow only controlled by orange pill bottles and like Big Daddy Pharma, that if we can find a way to make it actually help people out, and it introduces like all aspects of being human, I think that's the way out, man. It's so good. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. If there was anything else, Megan, from you, I thank you so much for your time. Like, this is so cool that you're willing to come here and chat with me for so long, and give me so much of your time. Like, I really hope it sends people over your guys' way. Was there any other knots that you wanted to tie, or anything else you wanted to make sure you mentioned?
I mean, the only analogy that I did not say was my puzzle piece analogy, which is, I think, really helpful in terms, I've kind of covered it a little bit. But I say this to people probably almost every single day, and it's probably like just as effective, I would say, as like the computer analogy. But in terms of like kind of giving you an idea of how this like treatment works, like kind of what to expect. It's essentially, when you first come to this, imagine that you have a puzzle piece, and this puzzle piece represents your entire life story, all of your experiences, everything that has essentially led you up until this point and made you who you are. And basically, you dump out all of the puzzle pieces on the floor. Now, of course, you're trying to look at this, you can't make anything out. It's just one great big, pile of chaos. Nothing is, you can't see how anything is connected to one another or how it's related to anything else. You don't have any context. You just have all of these individual little random pieces that you can't really make sense of. Again, talked earlier about the what, the where, and the why. And when you don't have all three of those pieces of information, that's what can tend to overwhelm us and make us like, oh my gosh, like I don't know what's going on here. I can't make sense of it because I don't have all of the pieces that I need. So it's essentially like when you start with the sessions, it's pretty much like you kind of start finding a couple of puzzle pieces at a time. So it's like, okay, I've done a few sessions. I found these pieces right here, and I was able to reassemble these right here, and then this over here, so on and so forth. And then to the point of where you're like, okay, now like, I've reassembled enough to the point where I can kind of make out what this is looking like, what's happening over here and then there. And on like basically so on and so forth to the point of where you've really been able to essentially reassemble this whole puzzle piece. And it's really only until this point, this is the idea of once you kind of really get that neurobiological reset where you get, a crazy epiphany or a breakthrough. And it's kind of just like all of the little pieces of information that you've been kind of just having running around or bouncing around your head and trying to make sense of. Now all of it just kind of can seem to fall into place, and you're able to just look at this full puzzle piece for what it actually is versus what you thought it was when you only had the individual little pieces. And you like now you can see how everything actually connects to one another and relates to it. So now you can get those three pieces of information: the what, the where, and the why. Right, when you're looking at this part of the puzzle, you're like, okay, I can see how this it connects to this piece over here, and why when this happens, like it makes me feel like this, or why I then think that. I know where it's coming from, why it's happening, and I get that full picture essentially. And that's really once you've been able to see everything for what it is, getting that kind of outside perspective. That's really where you can look at it objectively, and all of a sudden, that shift in perspective, that is everything. That's what ketamine is incredible for. It's the biggest thing that it allows us to do is when we're so stuck seeing something from one vantage point, we can't see all the other aspects that goes into that. We're just so fixated on this one thing. It's not until we then, move and shift and now come over here and we're still looking at the whole same thing, but just now that we're at this angle, I can see, oh, I couldn't really make this out before because it just wasn't in my line of sight. Now I can get that full picture and, take it for what it is and be able to then now build on this new foundation of, now that I understand what's going on, where it's coming from, and why it's happening. Now I can actually make the changes and start doing the things that I want, that I want to keep, that I want to get rid of, and getting to choose what I want and who I want to be versus having these things always essentially choosing for me. And so that's like probably like my favorite one, I would say, that I always like to share because I think it really helps, especially if you have not started with the treatment yet. It gives you kind of, like I said before, those analogies, giving you that little bit of the roadmap in terms of understanding, setting some expectations of it's not going to happen overnight. It can take some time. It's important to remember it does require some patience and a little bit of time in the beginning, but just, keep going. Like I said, take it day at a time, session at a time, and you just keep putting those puzzle pieces together. And that journaling as well, that's what's also going to really help you to kind of find those puzzle pieces and connect those dots essentially. So that's basically the only one that I wanted to include. That's definitely probably my favorite aside from the computer analogy, but I hope it helps. And also you can always like I said, we have a whole team of people that if you're interested but you're not quite sure if you're ready to take the leap, but you want to learn a little bit more about how it works, our program, pricing, so on and so forth, you go to our website, www.betterucare.com. You can schedule an intro call with somebody from our team where, like I said briefly before, they'll walk you through our program, the pricing, the process. And we do have financing options available. So we've tried to make this as affordable as possible so that everybody can have access to it. So just want to learn more, you can always have an intro call. It's free of charge. You don't have to pay or commit to anything. But yeah, that's basically like step one. Or you could always just go to the website and just take the plunge and sign up, and then basically you're still gonna have that communication and the whole process with us. So yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. I'm glad that you threw that one in there. Your analogies are just you're slaying with the analogies. They're all so good. Yeah, you guys. I mean, if you're listening, man, just just do an intro call at least. You're not committing to anything yet. Maybe you're worried about the finance, and they'll explain all that to you. Just do an intro call. It's worth getting your questions answered. If you've made it this far and you're really interested in healing something that's ailing you, then why not take the next step? Maybe this podcast is your sign to at least do that intro call. Check them out. Wow, this was so great. I feel like this was, even better than I could have expected. So I'm so, again, grateful for your time. Grateful for everybody over at Better You. Give Derek my thanks again. It's all so good. Yeah. So reach out on social media. I think you guys are a good follow too. Anyway, I like following you and seeing what you post on your stories and in the new content you come up with too. I will be. Yeah, I'll include, just look down the description if you're looking for anything else. Listeners, you know the deal. Love yourself, drink some water, stretch, make sure you're getting some morning sunlight, give yourself a break, take the next step in healing if that's what's whispering to you. So we will see you guys next episode. Megan, thank you once again for your time.
Thank
See
you
you
so
later,
much
everybody.
for having me. This has been awesome. I love to get to see you and connect with you again, since, originally we got to connect as, person to patient. Now just, getting to talk as two people along our own healing journeys. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it was so cool. I'm so glad that I just decided to send a little email. I was like, yeah, let's see if Megan's available. I mean, I wanted to talk to anybody from over there really, but it was cool that you were available. And I mean, you've been such a perfect guest for this. So I think everybody will be very grateful with all the information you've provided. So
Awesome.
thank you.
Well, thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.
See you guys. The Junkyard Love Podcast.
At what age do we learn how to have better conversations? At what age do we learn to have better conversations with ourselves?
Knowledge is power.